Right, okay. Welcome everybody to today's BHIUT board meeting. It is lovely to be able to have the first board meeting in person following COVID and then the slight disruption of our plans by the very sad death of Her Majesty. But it's very good to be in person today, and therefore also to have been able to do the board visits this morning. There will be the opportunity in the Part 2 board for the non-exec directors to feed back some sort of key things from their visits, and Linda has also got some sheets for people to put down any observations that they may have, which could then be compiled into a report. Clearly, we're at the start of doing this in this way, and we'll sort of take feedback and refine it as we go along. Welcome to those people who are observing the meeting today, particularly to Sam Hitchings from the CQC. You're very welcome. Let us move on then to the patient story, and Victoria, you're going to introduce that for us.
Certainly. Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. So really pleased today that I'm particularly with Vicky Stone, who is one of the lead nurses for Children's Services. She's going to talk us through a patient story that she was able to identify on the first no meetings day, so it freed her up to be able to go out onto the ward. And it's about a 16-year-old young man who was admitted to Tropical Lagoon, which is our children's ward.
Thanks everybody for inviting me and just giving me a chance to kind of talk through this patient story. So the young person I'm going to refer to is Tom. It's not his real name, but I just want to keep him anonymous for the patient story. So he was 16 and he got admitted to Tropical Lagoon, and there were quite a lot of pressures on our adult beds that day. So we had a conversation about where he would be the best place to receive his treatment, and we had some empty beds on Tropical Lagoon. So he was admitted under the ENT team to us on Tropical Lagoon, and obviously that does go outside of our normal admission criteria. We normally have usually just under 16-year-olds. So he was admitted. The day before, he was presented to adult ED with a history of pharyngitis. He had an extremely sore throat. He had already had 2 courses of antibiotics from his GP. He was unable to open his mouth. He couldn't talk. He couldn't swallow very well, and he wasn't able to eat and drink. And he had reported his pain as being 10 out of 10 in ED. And it was managed within the ED, but obviously he needs to come in for further investigations and treatment. He came in with his mum, and she was obviously able to stay with him as well on Tropical Lagoon. So I met Tom and his mum on the 29th of April, which, as Victoria said, was no meetings day. So I took that opportunity to have a free diary, and I spent the day going around all of my wards. And Tropical Lagoon was where I happened to be when I overheard the nurse in charge of me that day saying a parent had actually just shouted at one of the members of staff. I asked her if she had had the chance to go and speak to them, and she said that she was just busy with the board round, and I asked her if it would be appropriate for me to go and speak to them on her behalf. So I went to go and speak to the mum. I introduced myself. Actually, I missed out one little crucial bit as well. When I asked her which patient it was, she referred to him as the adult patient on the ward, which I asked her why she would do that, because we always actually refer to all of our children by their names, and it was unusual for me to hear that. So I asked her how she would feel if that was what was said about her if she was a patient on the ward. And it took her and another nurse to really kind of take a couple of minutes to kind of identify that they had done that. And it's very easy for us to do that he was an adult on our ward, but actually he was a young person who was receiving treatment on our ward. So I quite quickly pointed that out to them, that he has a name, and actually it'd be really nice to use it so that he doesn't feel that he is in the wrong place or that he's not welcome in our ward either. So I went over to the mum. She asked if I was coming to talk to her because she shouted at a nurse, and she obviously was very well aware of her behaviour. So I kind of said yes, I had, but actually I wanted to know, what was going on at the time. Was she worried about anything, or could I help her with anything? So we sat down at his bedside. I introduced myself to Tom as well. I asked him if he wanted to tell me how he was feeling at the time. he had a little notebook there and he scribbled a few things, and I think I asked him a few too many questions, and in the end he said, "Can you ask Mum?" So and I did. So we both sat there. He was in a lot of pain. You could see in his face he was in a lot of pain, and Mum was just anxious about how he was feeling and the kind of pain management plan that we actually had in place for him. And she was just very concerned. He had already been seen by ENT and the pain team that morning, and the nurse who was actually allocated to him had asked him to come and re-review. So we talked about how things had been that morning. He'd not been able to take any of his analgesia, but he was also on an infusion, which was a patient-controlled analgesia as well. I asked if she would be happy for me to go and talk to the teams that had arrived on the ward and just kind of discuss with them how they felt his pain was being managed. So I stepped outside and I spoke to both teams. They felt that he was being managed okay, and they also said, I think Mum's making him more anxious, and if she could just stop talking, then he might actually be okay. I also then felt that they hadn't really listened to what he was saying about his pain, and asked them to really think about, actually, if you can look at his documentation, his pain score says that he has a pain score of between 8 and 10 each time it's documented. And yes, he had periods of sleep throughout the night, but he is a 16-year-old boy. He will sleep regardless of what's going on. And he had woken up in excruciating pain because he'd not been able to use his PCA regularly throughout the night. So we talked about whether we could convert it to an NCA, which allows the nurses to control that, but they felt that that probably may not be necessary. So we reconsidered his whole treatment plan. We discussed with him the options of having rectal medications, because that would be a little bit easier for him. He was actually, at his age, they didn't think he would comply with that, but actually he was in that much pain, he was really open to that suggestion. So we put those into his management plan, and we also made a plan that whenever he had his observations during the night time, that he would be kind of encouraged to try and use his PCA to keep that kind of momentum going. So we tried to get on top of that, and it didn't take long, just a little bit of coordination between things. Mum felt he then had a much better plan. He was clear of what would happen and when people would then come back and actually look at it. I then asked Mum if there was anything else that she was concerned about, because I could see that she was quite tearful still and quite upset. And also I'd heard from the nurses that they were struggling to ask Mum to wear a mask on the ward. And at this time we were still very much wearing masks with our patients as well, all around the ward, and making sure that was being done. So she had said that she was really, really grateful to be admitted to the children's ward. She was really mindful that she may not have been able to stay if she'd been on an adult ward, and that was really positive for her. And she said, no one's even asked me why I can't wear a mask. And she said, and I haven't been sort of not trying to, but actually she'd actually had a stroke 3 years ago, and she actually had poor vision and quite a sensory kind of deficit, and she was finding it really hard to wear a mask or a visor. But she said that she would try and do that if that was okay. She alluded as well that she was quite stressed. There was some things going on at home. She had, Tom was actually a twin, so she had another 16-year-old at home. I asked who was with them, and she said that he was at school and then a friend would be looking after them, because Dad wasn't part of their family setup and they weren't having contact with him at that time. I asked her if she knew that he was going to be okay for the next couple of days, because obviously Tom was going to be remaining with us and she had a plan set in place. I asked her whether she thought Tom was worried about her, because she was obviously quite clearly upset, and she said, yes, they do worry about me a lot, and they worry about me because I can have seizures at any time as well. So none of this had been picked up by our nursing team, and actually when I went back to talk to the nursing team, we don't ask that question on admission within our admission pack on our children's ward. And where I've worked before, we have always asked whether parents have any medical conditions we should know about, such as diabetes, of seizures or anything like that, so that we have an awareness if there's an emergency that the child may not know any of those conditions either. So we've since made some adjustments to our admission plan, because I think that would have helped our nursing team know about the stresses that she was under and what that could trigger in her own health as well. So she was kind of worried about that. So I went back and spoke to the nurses afterwards and just kind of relayed all the information that I'd found in a good sort of 10-15 minute conversation. And I recognise that all of the nursing team are busy on the ward, and sometimes it's hard to find the time, but I think if they found the time to make those conversations with her, they would have found a lot of useful information. It would have helped them support her and support Tom at the time, and actually kind of identify a really clear plan. So I said that I would check in with them over the week after the weekend, but they'd actually got discharged home, and they went home with a really good pain management plan, again with a lot of rectal medications for him to continue, and he has since had follow-up in ENT and been seen within our within the adult ENT clinic, and by all means his discharge letters was doing really well. So some of the things that I learned through that kind of patient story was the value of my time to talk to children and young people and their families. I try as much as I can to get out, but the no meetings day really did free me up that time to actually just have the time to spend on all of my units at Queen's. And then the next one I went over to KGH and actually met my team over at Dahlia just to spend the whole day with them over there. The value of listening to the young person. He may have been 16 and he wanted to talk, but he also wanted his mum to talk to it for him. So we need to recognise that even though he may have been an adult, or he would have been in adult services, his mum was still doing a lot of his decision making for him. Not to refer to anybody as an adult on the ward, they're a person and they have a name. And the value of listening to the parent story too, and just finding out what their situation is. The value of working together to have a plan. We had a really good collaborative plan in the end, and it was a really good safe plan for that child who was able to then be pain-free over the next couple of days. And it also identified the gap in our admission processes on the ward, which may not have been picked up if I hadn't had the conversation around understanding what parental kind of medical conditions they have as well. And then more importantly as well, the value of my role modelling to the rest of the team and actually having those conversations and making the time to do that. And hopefully that then came across to them that if I can spend the time doing it, then they would as well. That's my story.
Vicky, thank you very much for that. And perhaps just before we carry on, welcome to members of the public who've joined us for the meeting today. Andy, nice to see you. Good job that everybody is so good looking, given that you are filming us.
Well, my apologies for lateness.
That's okay. So, Vicky, thank you. And I have to confess to having had a certain amount of scepticism about a no meetings day. You've sort of convinced me of some of the benefits to the story. So thank you for that. Are there other questions or comments that anybody has? Kathy.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, powerful, and again around listening. So, what do you think have been the ongoing overall benefit? I know you said that there were some changes to things, but what do you think the wider learning from that might be?
I think just taking the time to step back as the nursing team. They're forever firefighting and forever feeling like they've just got to do tasks, and actually just taking that step back to spend time. And you will always get angry people. You've got people that are at heightened anxiety, but they've usually got reason for it in any setting. So it's just about being able to respond appropriately to that and not dismiss that and not get angry by it. So it felt to me like my nurse in charge on that day was just really angry about it. But actually, if she'd actually had the conversation, she would have found out what was behind it. And I think sometimes we're so busy that we forget to do that. And that's the most important bit. So I've tried to encourage them to really spend the time with their families, that they're not just doing tasks, and that we're trying to do as much talking to families as much as possible, because that will strengthen our patient experience reports as well. And so we have been trying to ensure that not just our ward managers, but our actual nurses who are allocated to the patients kind of try and find a little bit out about them. So a bit of a wider learning of just being able to say, what's your family's situation out tonight today?
Magda.
Thank you very much for that. And one of the things that struck me listening is that it was really fortuitous that you happened to be on the ward at that particular time. So what I'm thinking about is that incidents with patients, relatives, where they become stressed, they become angry. I hear about it in newspapers. It not only occurs in hospitals, it occurs with the police, it occurs with the fire service, all the first responders. Do we, as an organisation, have a process where when an incident like that happens, our staff have got somewhere to go that could help them diffuse the situation? Because you were present, you were able to diffuse the situation. What strategies have we got as an organisation that help us do that?
So I think, yes, I happened to be there, but there was also a ward manager and there were some other senior nurses around that day as well. So usually the person that is looking after the patient would escalate to the nurse in charge for support to have a conversation together. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But normally if the nurse in charge hasn't been able to have that conversation or feels that they would need support, they would access one of the other, either the clinical site practitioners that we have in children's who are senior nurses, or their own ward manager who is based on the ward as well. And then together they would have a conversation with that family member. But we do always have a senior nursing representative on 24 hours a day, so that they would always be able to go and find somebody to go and have a conversation and try and resolve that situation. We try and do it locally because we don't really want it to result in a PALS or complaint, because we know that just prolongs the follow-up of that situation. So we would always try and resolve it there and then.
Thank you.
I would add to that, if I may, that we introduced with the patient advice and liaison service the daily ward visits. So every day the PALS officers are out physically on the wards, going around talking to patients, talking to the staff. Are there any issues, anybody that might need support from us? So we're trying to move PALS back into what it's supposed to be, which is that supportive mechanism, rather than just dealing with the informal concerns that we've been dealing with traditionally.
Matthew, and then Sue.
Yeah, thank you. It was really good to hear that. And one of the issues that I think has come through this is the busyness, I think, among the organisation in terms of clinical and operational staff. We're in a very task-focused environment where when you step away from the immediate task, you tend to then put yourself in a meeting. Because we run very close to what we've looked for in terms of maximum efficiency, what you sometimes do is you lose the space for stuff that's harder to measure, but is actually much more important in terms of the experience of the patients that come into the services and the running of good, effective wards. And I think the No Meetings Day for all of us has been a bit of a revelation. You know, for someone like me, after I get over this slight sense of fear of not having a diary that's 8 or 9 hours meeting, you think, right, where do I go? And what can I do that's useful today, actually? And it is really empowering. The other important issue here, though, is how many formal complaints we can avoid if we have a good conversation with people right at the outset, actually. And I get, as I'm sure Shane does, I get various contacts, social media, direct emails to me saying, you know, I've got this problem. You know, my mother's on this ward and I'm worried about her medication. What can you do? And the power of picking up the phone straight away and saying, I'm sorry this has happened. I'm sorry you feel like this. I'll speak to someone and we'll try and sort it. I know Catherine knows because I bombard her with these things because she usually. But there's something about how much actual work we can save and how much better the experience can be for the patient. The number of very formal escalation complaints where I get in and it's been going on for 3 years. And you think, if only we'd sat down right at the start, said sorry, tried to put it right through a conversation. And I worry how much fear there is sometimes on the behalf of clinical staff who don't feel empowered to have those conversations. That's something we do need to have a good think about.
Yeah, I think they do worry about saying that sometimes, but we have made really good progress with our sort of formal complaints as well. So I've been in the organisation a year and we were in double figures, and we're really down to, we've actually only got 4 or 5 open now. So something is working, and whether that is that we are trying really hard to talk to our families in a more clearer way, and we've certainly been having a lot of kind of work streams around that especially on the inpatient areas.
Sue.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I think your wisdom and your role modelling are absolutely exemplary. What I'm interested in, and it may be more a question for Peter, Linda, I'm not sure. Every year we produce an annual report that talks about all the fantastic things we've done. And I'm not sure how we capture these small changes, this role modelling, this cultural shift that you are part of. And the No Meetings Day has real power if we can communicate that. So my question is, how are we capturing this so that when we come to the annual report, we can roll up and tell a really good story? And how are we communicating the power of the No Meetings Day so that other people will use it the way that you've used it? Because I suspect a lot of people are sceptical. Then it works, doesn't it? You've evidence that it works.
Yeah, it gave me permission to not have anything. So, because otherwise everything just does get full up with meetings after meetings, and you feel obliged to be in those meetings, whether you have much of a contribution or not. So I think having the permission to not and then to actually really make time to be with your teams is very valuable to me.
I wonder if it's something that, because I'm getting with the programme, I wonder if it's something we could share on Workplace.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
The other thing that we're doing is we've started a repository of all the patient stories so that we can make them available throughout the trust for kit days, training days, etc. But also so that we can do exactly that. We can look back at the end in our annual reports to include some of the really good stories where there's been change in practice, change in policy.
That's a good idea. Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Victoria, for introducing the story.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on, formally apologies for absence, we have Mabu, who is poorly, and thank you to Marta, who will be introducing the Finance Committee report, Caroline Roberts and Fiona Wheeler. We've got the declarations of interests, nothing updated on there. Is anybody got any conflicts with respect to anything on the agenda that they need to report today?
I'm not sure if there's anything related to what they've done the other way around.
Yes,
Today.
I think it was specifically because it was a business case. I think not looking at it, yeah. But thanks for reminding us. Which brings us to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 23rd of September. So I'll go through a page at a time for any corrections. Page 1.
I think Marta's down as both present and apology.
It's nice to know I can be back.
You are. Two places at once.
Yes, you are. And you were there, weren't you?
I was there.
Yeah, you were there. We'll remove you from the apologies. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Okay, with that correction, we will approve those as a correct record then. There are no matters that have been notified in advance of the meeting that aren't included in the agenda. Nobody has any. Good. On the action tracker, we've got the action related to the categorisation of incidents relating to high-risk women so that we could identify the trends. Catherine, I think that's being taken forward as part of the work on the patient safety incident response framework. What do we think about the timescale?
So I think that is the case, but since we've agreed this action, we have sort of changed the way we're investigating SI. So we are now picking up high risk elements. If you remember last month, I talked about the report that we've done into uterine deaths and that identified some of those demographic changes. So I just wonder if we could close that in view.
Because we think it's covered sufficiently in the way in which we're now doing instance. Are you happy with that, Catherine?
Yes, I mean, I think what I've circled at some time as well. I just wonder if perhaps we just reflect on that at QAC as well, and ensure that we've really sort of bottomed it. We'll be looking at the maternity as we'll later as well.
Okay, great, good, thank you. And then we have had the divisional recovery plans presented at the private trust board in October, so we can close that second action. Okay, just a few things from me. It was relatively recently that we had the last public meeting, so I'm going to keep my remarks reasonably brief. First of all, on the 24th of October with Anne, we were able to welcome to Barking Community Hospital Dame Margaret Hodge MP, and members of the Barking and Dagenham Place-Based Partnership. That was, of course, part of both an opportunity to show those colleagues the upgraded diagnostic equipment. So we looked at the mobile CT and MRI scanners. We looked at the ultrasound department. But it also enabled us to talk about the plans for the community diagnostic centre, which of course we've been involved in consulting on, and was an opportunity to update those partners at that particular time. And we also had the opportunity to talk with partners about the future of our work in terms of the place-based priorities for Barking and Dagenham in particular. So I think it was a sort of useful opportunity to demonstrate that place-based work, and also, of course, to talk about some quite important progress made there in terms of our diagnostic equipment. We, on the 18th of October, Matthew and Shane and I were able to attend the Outer North East London Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We provided an update on the performance within the hospital and some of our key issues, and we also talked about the development of the acute provider collaborative, and in particular the priorities that we've agreed to work on together. On the 20th of October, I took Shane to Parliament, to Portcullis House, to be introduced as the Group CEO to the North East London MPs. You may or may not remember what happened on the 20th of October, but at the moment at which our meeting was due to start, the lectern was set up outside number 10 and the Prime Minister resigned. Given that, I thought we had quite a good turnout. And after we'd finished looking at that and exclaiming about the speed with which we were getting through Prime Ministers, Shane actually was able to give a good account, and we had some good questions, and I think it was really good and positive. And there were some members of Parliament there who had been some of the most sceptical about the collaboration, and although they keep telling us how sceptical they are, they actually are also engaging really very positively and could see the work that was happening. So that was very useful. Just one other thing internally to talk about, and that is I'd just like to take this opportunity to congratulate people, in particular members of the Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Network, who've been involved in the really great programme of events that we've had for Black History Month, including a series of really good talks with a great range of external speakers, including Sergeant Chris Excel, Chair of the Black Police Association, Barry Mussenden of the Department of Health, and co-founder of UK Black Pride and Executive Director of Kaleidoscope Trust, Phyllis Opoku-Gima. And there were also events hosted by our own staff, including by Devesh Sinha, our Chief Clinical Information Officer, and Deputy Medical Director Ahmed Soliman, who spoke about identity and imposter syndrome. And also as part of Black History Month, I, along with other exec members, were challenged to pledge to do something specific to support our mission to become a truly inclusive organisation. And I committed to listening to Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues and reflecting their experiences to ensure that this board takes action on fair recruitment, progression, pay and representation. And those were made public in the workplace, including in other areas. And I look forward to working with you in order to ensure that we're able to deliver on those pledges. And finally, Shane's going to talk about the collaboration in more detail in a moment, but just worthwhile saying for other board members that, of course, next week we'll be holding the third of the board collaboration committee meetings, where we'll be talking about the final draft of the plan for approval. Not that work hasn't been ongoing, but there'll be clarity about how that fits together. And then, of course, on the following week, we've got the joint board meeting with, or the coming together of the two boards with Barts Health, with Zena Etheridge and Marie Gabriel from the ICS, so that we can hear from them about the priorities of the ICS, and we can talk about the way in which our work and our collaboration fits within that, and probably challenge each other to make sure that we're clear about where responsibility is sitting, and the progress that we're making for patients. I think that will be a good session, and I'm pleased that they're coming. On Monday, Mark and I are meeting as well with Zena and Marie to talk about significance of research for the ICS, and also some of the important initiatives that Mark is supporting across Barts Health and BHRUT. So I think that will also be very positive. Are there any questions or comments on that? Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things that are covered in my report I'll pick out. First is on maternity services. We're discussing this at more length, but we've seen the results of our Ockenden review by NHS England, and I've included the results of that report in our public board papers so that people can have a look at that. But I think what that does is it presents a good, clear-sighted external view of the work we've been doing in maternity services over the last year or two. We've made sweeping changes, I think, to the leadership team there. And we've got a new leadership team in that service who've put in some incredibly hard work to build a more positive culture there, to address some of the safety concerns we had in the service as well. And I think we're anticipating that CQC will be looking at the service again soon. And I think that Ockenden process has actually been very helpful about making sure that we're setting the right tone there, doing the right things, that we have a credible plan. I think that we'll see the services continue to push in a positive direction. So I hope people have taken the time to read that. I was pleased to see that, and I was also pleased for the leadership team there. And thanks to Catherine and others who've been very supportive of them, because they've taken on a tough challenge there, but they're starting to see the seeds that they've planted really bearing fruit there, actually. So it's really positive news on that front. And of course, we'll talk later about the East Kent report. So these are services that will continue to rightly be under a lot of scrutiny. And I'm pleased that we've had that assurance that we're moving things in the right direction. Emergency care and the urgent emergency care pathway is continuing to rightly get a lot of attention nationally. We know about the really serious delays that ambulances are facing, the long waits that people are now facing across London nationally in terms of urgent emergency care. And we've been doing a lot of work, and I won't say too much about it because Caroline will talk about some of the things we've been doing in her update on performance. But at Queen's this year, where we've been focusing our work in the first place, we've seen around a 9% increase in our type 1 performance since January. And this is a result of a number of things we've been doing to try to decompress the department, including working with PELC, who run the Urgent Treatment Centre, to enforce in a more structured way the clinical difference between type 3 patients who should be seen and treated there and those who should come through to ED. And also, people might have read about the North Bristol model. Well, we think we have a stronger version in Romford, which is Operation Snowball, which is so-called because it keeps rolling and getting bigger, whereby we're now, rather than waiting for a bed before people move out of ED, when we know we'll get capacity later in the day, we've been actively pushing admitted patients through into the frailty unit. And you'll see from the operational update that are starting to really see higher activity through frailty, reducing length of stay by allowing those older patients to see the right clinicians out there. We started it in acute medicine now. We've got plans to roll it further into surgery in the course of the next month. What this is all about doing is decompressing the emergency department earlier in the day to try to help us with ambulance operators and to create the space in ED for us to open a larger same-day emergency care service. So Caroline will say a bit more about that, but that is starting to really get some traction. And it's been good to see us plan changes, make the changes, and those changes start to sustain some positives. We are facing a challenge in ED with mental health patients. So in September, I think we had more than 28 patients who were there for over 36 hours while waiting for admission treatment. And I think some of you might have been on the children's ward today. I think we've got a young woman who's actually not waiting for mental health placement, has now spent more than 150 hours in the emergency department waiting for a social care placement. And I think these kinds of situations, because of a lack of external capacity, we're increasingly finding that the acute site is being used as somewhere to hold people who aren't able to access the right kind of care outside of the hospital. These are really unpleasant situations for us to see. And you don't want to be in a position of sending someone out of the hospital with nowhere safe to go. But equally, while someone's in a cubicle for that period of time, it means we're losing that capacity to admit and treat other people who come in with urgent care needs. And it's a really difficult situation we're trying to get the ICB's help with, actually. On planned care, we've reduced the number of 78-week waiters from surgery to close to 500 in August, down to, I think, down to around 60 to 80 at the minute. The numbers fluctuate week to week as we work through. But we're pushing hard into that, and in a later update, you'll hear the work we're doing on getting that waiting list smaller. You also hear from Nick about the money, where we've put in plans. I think we were hoping to end the year around £20 million overspent. And there's been some really hard work meant to get to grips with some of our higher cost agency doctors and some other efficiencies to get us there. So we've covered all that in there. Cost of living, really pressing issue. We are worried that some of the plans we've got in place may be knocked off course by this over the course of the winter, because we know the staff are facing a lot of financial pressures. We know we're also likely to face industrial action over the course of the winter. There's ballots out there now for that, and that will affect the way we work with this. We're trying to help staff in a number of ways. We've got Marketplace coming up soon, run by the charity Smile, to give people access to food, toys, other things. We gave out school uniforms earlier this year, and we've also had a trial of providing free period products to staff that we're hoping to extend through to the end of the year as well. Because although the pay structures are managed nationally, there's things we can do to try to help get money into people's pockets as well. We're working well with our cost saving team on that. And finally, soon we'll be welcoming Janine LaRosa as our Chief People Officer. She's joining us from the NHS England, really first class appointment into the team to come in to really help us with some of those issues around the culture within the workforce that come through very clearly in our staff survey. And also we've appointed Louise Dark, also from NHS England, who will be joining us in the spring as Managing Director of King George Hospital, as part of our focus of giving that hospital a stronger local identity and a site-based leadership team to really help us with issues around flow and quality. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Leslie?
It's just picking up the point about mental health and our separate conversation with you about the experience in children's CG. But at the Barts board yesterday, Shane raised exactly, you were there, the same point about the increasing numbers of people who actually need mental health beds or mental health support that are in A&E and completely unsuitable surroundings, both for them and for the people that are trying to take care of them and other patients. And I know we're trying to work with the ICB, but it kind of seems to me that this almost needs ratcheting up, because this is becoming a really serious issue and a real risk issue for individuals and for staff and for other patients. And the chair of the ICB has the history of having chaired a mental health trust, and I don't know what the solution is, but it just seems to me we have to find a way of getting traction. And I know there's a national issue around investment in mental health, where the investment just hasn't gone into mental health services, but it's actually beginning to have a really significant impact on our services and Barts services, and presumably London-wide. And that there must be some way of us, I'm sure the ICB can do something, but there must be some way of us raising this up the agenda, both on a London-wide basis and from it just needs tackling urgently.
It's also something that we may, I have talked to Marie about, and it could also be something, of course, that might be part of the conversation when we have our joint board session with them, as well as the work that I know is going on with executive leaders. Ruth and then Marta.
I think part of, yes, I do think it needs to be escalated, but what I don't want to see is that we focus on inpatient beds.
Yeah.
Because the problem is actually way before that. We should never be letting children, particularly, well, anyone, but it's particularly sad, I think, that children are getting to that severity of mental illness that they're requiring to come through the A&E doors. And there's plenty of opportunity before that, but unfortunately there is absolutely nothing in the community. So it becomes a desperation point and then needs a lot more resource. So yes, I would like us to escalate it, but I think we need to escalate it in the right way, so that the answer isn't, well, let's make some more inpatient beds, because that is absolutely not the way we should be going.
Matthew and then Marta then Sue.
So I think I agree that community services is the way out of this. That won't help us this winter, I don't think. And I think if we're quite frank about it, the issue this winter is predominantly admitted patients need somewhere to wait. And we're in a position where we're now right across the hospital site, often taking an extra patient onto all of our wards. You know, so it's considered fine and frailty for us to +1 on our wards and have a patient without a bed space to go to on there while we try and work through discharge and manage the risk in that way. And yet there's no circumstances under which a mental health trust will go one patient over their unit. You know, if they've got a 100-bed unit, they will not take 101st. And so they stay here. And I think for some reason we've got into a position where it's considered fine to leave someone in an emergency department for upwards of, I think a record's close to 300 hours now. And it's considered okay for them to be here, and yet not for a mental health unit to go one patient over their numbers. And that feels to me to be fundamentally wrong. And the other issue is that in the case that the child is currently in our ED, actually that person is waiting not for a mental health bed, they're waiting for a social care placement. And actually some of the particularly long ones, I think we had a child who was in our children's ward for close to a month, a couple of months ago, again waiting for a social care placement, who I think the local authority in Scotland. And you know, and when you're in these circumstances, when that's the availability, again we hold that patient. Even with no physical health needs and no mental health needs that we can care for in there. And I think it's a really unacceptable situation.
We are working hard to manage risk throughout the hospital in terms of the patient pathway. We need a way to manage risk across the system as well. Marta.
Just to add another aspect of it, which I think we need to try and work out if we can quantify, is the additional cost. Particularly with adults, where we're having to provide additional security, considering our financial situation, I think we should, if it's possible, we should capture that cost so we can make it more transparent.
Good point, Marta, thank you. Did you want to respond to that, Nick?
It's around £2 million a year.
And it's also about how we report it.
Yeah. So.
Thank you. So we have obviously discussed this at FIC because of the financial cost pressure. I just wanted to say, with my Ned in Common with NELFT hat on, this is something that I have taken into NELFT. And somewhat stealing your point, Jackie, I think this is about how we manage system risk. And we've started to make really powerful inroads in managing risk within the hospital between ED and the wards. I think we need to find a way of having that same conversation system-wide. And I have this week written to Sue Evans, who's the acting audit chair for the ICS, to ask if we could get the audit chairs together, because I think that's a good forum to talk about system risk. So just to put that on the table, that's a really good initiative. Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you. I do take your point with care, but lots of the children that we have in, we know very well. They come in week after week after week, and working. It's not good enough for them. So I think that we need to acknowledge that the community services do need to increase, but we, I think, know that with anything like that, and they're just not in the community services for long. A brief intervention, they're okay for a week and then they're back into us. And so I think that is a really sad, the teams come in. The other thing about security is we don't just use security for adults, we also have security guards supporting the children. And certainly the case that Matthew talked about when we had a patient on the ward, we had 4 security guards 24 hours a day onto that.
Okay. Well, it is an ongoing and serious issue, and it's good to hear that there is an escalation to the system and a range of ways in which we can pursue, hopefully, some action on this. Anything else on Matthew's report before we move on?
No.
Okay, Shane, verbal collaboration update.
Yes, thank you. So just a few points on collaboration. I start with the acute provider collaborative. So that's obviously between ourselves here at PHAT, Barts Health and the Hobbiton. So good work going on there, prioritising improvements in patient care in sort of 6 clinical pathways strategically. So urgent emergency care, planned care, maternity, critical care, cancer, and then babies, children, and young people. So that's a lot of pathways, covering a lot of people, but that's really my focus in terms of our clinical strategy. We're also working through the APC around a joint approach to research and specialist services and specialist commissioning, and we'll feed that into the overarching North East London approach to strategy that sort of comes to light in February, March next year. So in that context, the BARTS EHRT collaboration is going quite well, and we're just trying to balance what things can you do in the short term and versus those that are going to take a bit more time, but essentially supporting the clinical transformation that I've referenced earlier. And Jackie's referenced the collaboration committee, which meets later this month, and that's going to bring the most up-to-date plan, focusing on workforce, finance, governance, and benefits we can work together for patients and for staff. And I think Matthew and I are quite cognizant that we need to balance the sort of the need to collaborate where it's going to have immediate benefits alongside the medium long term, but also the fact that we're already starting to get to the depths of winter and people need to be focused on keeping patients safe at the relative hospitals in parallel. I think the only other thing to say, two things to say. We had a very helpful executive session this week for the sort of BARTS Health and DHRT execs. We've also met together as a broader collaboration with trust boards. That was the first time we've had a sort of full executive session. I think very, very well, and the outputs of that will feed into the version of the collaborative board we'll see in the next few weeks. And I think lastly, we're just trying to get into some of this linking to the ICS around inequalities, some of the areas around North East London we know we can address together. And touching this conversation earlier, trying to utilise some of the community benefits we've talked about, particularly sort of Barking CBC, one example, Whips Cross in terms of its new hospital proposal versus a whole campus proposal. So that medium to long-term piece is going to be quite important for this collaboration. So we do what we're trying to do here is actually make a difference to some of those metrics that have been long-standing in there. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Are there any questions or comments on that? Okay, good, thank you. Let's move on to quality and safety. And we're going to start with the Kathy updating from the Quality Assurance Committee. And Kathy, can I just thank you for the work that has already, I know, gone into the way in which the Quality Committee is operating and the strong partnership that you and Catherine have formed on doing this. So it's appreciated.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm still going to say it is early days for me in this committee. So, you know, if there are shortcomings, apologise for that. I think you can see there that we've set out, you know, the things that we've covered there quite clearly related that to the board assurance framework. And also, obviously, we had some focus on the emergency department, as you would expect. You know, there's a lot of focus on that at the moment. So that felt really important to look at the safety there and so on. And we will come back to that in the November meeting. I think it was good to see progress on the radiology. There were some issues there, and it certainly in part there's been really good progress. But there are some aspects of it that yet needs to continue, so we will be keeping a close eye on that. The adult inpatient survey, again, is something that I think as a committee we'll need to be working closely with, and Catherine will be leading the work. That I think we were disappointed, I think is the word to say, about being both the response rate but also actually the findings. So I think that's going to be a big focus for us over the next period of time. We've got Ockenden on the agenda later, but you can see there from the way we've set out to show where we are assured or otherwise, and we've tried to make that really clear in terms of, you know, we have partial assurance on most of those areas, which means we will continue to focus. But I hope that makes it really clear for board where we've taken our assurance from. So I'll pause there, but it is a work in progress. Perhaps worth noting we are moving to immediately we are moving to a bi-monthly arrangement. And I have to credit Linda as well. We've been really supportive, and Linda and her team have been very supportive in the changes I've wanted to make quite quickly. So I really appreciate that. And we will build and change over time. Nothing happens immediately, I'm afraid.
Just really quickly, as someone who isn't on the quality committee, can I say I found the summary of assurances incredibly helpful, because it actually just really clearly states out the issues
and what you're doing and what the committee's doing about it and what the level of assurance is. So I found that reassuring, even though it's not completely reassuring, if you see what I mean, but incredibly helpful.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to the integrated quality and safety report then. Catherine.
Thank you very much indeed. So this is just a flash report giving an update of where we are this moment really. We'll continue to focus on the closure of incidents and are getting a lot more
Catherine,
traction. Oh,
I'm getting older, and you're quite quiet.
right?
Yeah.
That has rarely been said.
Thanks for that one.
It sounds very loud in my ears. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
That's fine. So this is just the quantity and safety flash report. So we're focusing very much on the closure of incidents and we're getting a lot of traction. I've talked a lot about here and at the back of the steering group about that, but we are getting a lot of traction from the divisions on that. That's really good news. Our SIs are being discussed both at Project Government Steering Group and at PAC, where we're focusing much more on learning and how that learning can be shared, which is something that we've strived to do for quite some time. Victoria talked about our patient partners, and our volunteers are now spending much more time on the wards, seeking feedback from patients in real time, which I think is really helpful and will help us really understand what patients are saying. We paused this quite a lot during COVID, and we've are now spending much more time out and about as well. We're continuing to work on the implementation of PISA, and that will be in September next year. Mandatory training remains our Achilles heel, really. We go up and down a bit with that. We are overall at 90%, but there is some variability, and AMAMTA is well aware that some of those areas are specifically related to the medical staff, and that's not new. But we have a new resus team who are really focused and are really trying to help us get over this 90% and stay over 90%. So I hope that we're going to be able to do that in the future. And we also have been reporting some slowness in closing our risk actions, and I have to say that this month we've seen a considerable increase in the number of risks closed and risk actions closed, so that's very positive. So we'll continue to take those reports through the QAC, and then you'll get the report as you have this time. So I'm happy to take it.
Okay, thank you. I'm sort of a bit fussy about this, and I've raised it before, but on the second page, incidents not resulting in patient harm, just everything that we rightly talk about relates to encouraging reporting, focusing on high levels of incident reporting, making sure that large proportions of those are low or no harm. Then we say under issues and risks, high levels of incident reporting results in increased workload to maintain incident closure within expected timeframe. That's true, but I wouldn't want anyone to read that as a reason why we wouldn't still be encouraging high levels of incident
No,
reporting.
absolutely, our reporting levels are high.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
okay, if you look at our levels of reporting nationally, we report in the top 20% in terms of reporting levels. Yeah.
Good.
I'll make sure it's not there next time.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments? Sue.
Thank you for the report, Catherine, as ever. On the open incidents, I just wondered whether there's any themes that we should be developing to sort of roll them up a bit and take them forward, given the backlog we've got.
So we have done that with some, and we've been talking with the ICB about that. So things like our 12-hour waits, we have now not looking at those individually. We've also looked at some of the backlog of the COVID cases, and some of those we're having a sort of grouping together because the learning is the same.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.
Just one thing that occurred to me when I was going through this is that we've got here under caring, the overall positive experience rate from both has increased to quite a good level, and I'm just thinking that it's something we probably ought to do is triangulate that with what came through the inpatient survey, because the two kind of statements don't kind of match, and I think that's something we ought to try and get under so that we're not describing two different worlds, you know what I mean? But Catherine will probably explain why it has to be.
Well, no, not really. I can explain why it's like that, because this is the family and friends
Yes,
test.
I know.
And the family and friends test is something that you give to people on the ward, so
Yeah.
of course you're going to get a better score. So we will continue to use that, but we've also, I think I mentioned it last month, we're doing replica surveys so that we can look at the feedback from patients using exactly the same questions as there are in the National Inpatient Survey. We've also reintroduced our post-discharge calls, so we're talking to patients after they leave the hospital, so we think they give us a truer reflection of their experience. But this is, it's not a very helpful thing to have to report on, because of course the vast majority of people in hospital, I think, are going to give you a positive response, really. But we have to report on it. So
Yeah.
I think we should report on it and read it with a note of caution.
Yes, I would agree with that. So I think that's the point, really, is that I think it's all those other things we kind of need to bring together into a rounded picture. Otherwise, we could take a bit of, we understand it, don't we, that it's not really all that good, but we could take some false assurance on this. Anyway, I'm sure it's something that we will come back with, a sort of rounded picture of patient experience. Linda?
As the patient partner representative, I guess, in here, I have to say that I think it would be a useful idea to take the CQCs, which isn't very good, as you said, and actually perhaps try to think of targeting our questions. When we go around in the wards, we are there as voluntary people. We're not part of the hospital setup, which means that we are slightly different and hopefully get a more honest approach, because we're not actually part of the organisation. We're very clear about that. We're not part of the VHRUT's management structure. And we hope that that way people are perhaps more free in what they might say to us. It doesn't always work that way. But I have to say that what we do tend to do is on a random basis. We respond to what people tell us, rather than perhaps having a series of questions. When we do the ward accreditation framework, obviously we go out with a series of questions. Whereas normally when we just go as a patient partner, we're a bit random about it, which is useful in one respect because we pick up a lot of random information. But on the other hand, if we are to positively contribute to improvement, we might want to start thinking about being a bit more focused, still retaining that independence, but still being a bit more focused about how we address those questions. It's very difficult to do that because obviously the patient partners are all different. They come from different backgrounds, different opportunities, and we don't actually have that many of them, I have to say, at the present time we're recruiting. But it might be helpful to actually be a bit more focused about it, because that way we'll get better information and we can contribute to the triangulation that we're talking about.
Okay, and there's good progress, isn't there, on recruiting additional patient partners and using those more, particularly in relation to what we discovered in the inpatient survey and making sure that we're getting out and about.
Yes, yes. It's been a bit of a struggle, I have to say, trying to get people to come forward. But yes, we are in a recruitment campaign at the present time.
Okay, good. Any other questions on that? Okay, let's move on then to
the team had seen some improvements in the and Wednesday. You may remember we put investment into governance, but they felt there was still some made in this area and we've done some additional work since. The maternity teams had a look at the Kirkup report and has reviewed the actions, and they're starting to develop the action plan. but many of the areas really align with the Ockenden report. It's similar things that are being found everywhere. I think the difference in this report is that it hasn't just repeated the learning again and again. Kirkup really said that there is some learning that needs to take place at a national level that needs to be led by the regulators, and I think that's why we don't quite know what that's going to look like yet, but clearly we need to launch. So as a team, we'll continue to work on the areas that we can that have been highlighted through Kirkup. We'll obviously work with any regulatory changes, and we'll continue to work on our Ockenden review. We also are aware that we will have a CQC report, and that will be taken, I think, before the end of March, but we don't have a date for that. All of these reports are slightly different things. CQC looks slightly differently to Ockenden, and there has been quite a lot of pushback from the regions to the CQC asking about if the regions are doing the Ockenden review, how does that feed into the CQC? I don't think there's an answer to that yet, but that's certainly
It is an important point, isn't it, that the emphasis now is on reflection and bringing together the really pretty damning report elements of the various reports, as opposed to continuing to take a sort of tick box approach, or just simply a list of things. We have to challenge ourselves as a board and as an organisation to really think carefully about how we're ensuring that we're listening to mothers and families, that we've got the right people in the right place, that we're focusing on safety. Leslie.
I actually thought that the Kirkup report was really good from that perspective, because it actually focused on culture and stopped people coming up with a list of 110 actions, which you then write 110 things next to and you forget the first one. And the fact that it boiled it down to things that you actually really need to do. And this was a point made at Bart's yesterday, but one of the things it points out is the role of the Trust Board and the challenge that the Trust Board needs to provide, and the fact that the Trust Board did not carry out its role very effectively. So when you come back with something in doing that, we should think about our role and making sure that we're playing out what we need to do.
Ruth.
I think the thing that reading the report from September that really shouted out to me was actually how far we've come, and that the investment in it, not just money investment, but really time investment in changing the culture. And as we all know, culture does not change overnight, but it is changing, and you can see that. And I really hope the team doesn't look at some of the negatives in this, but actually really sees where the leadership is taking that group, and that they are going with them. As always, we don't have all the answers or all the magic ones, but I really do think it's a testament to the team as a whole that they are now working together and really start to understand each other and each other's priorities, because it is moving forward. It's just we're not there yet.
Kathy.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I've seen a number of these and from a number of different organisations, and I think this is a really positive assessment of where we are and triangulated with that, that external view. I think is really, really good. But one of the things that strikes me from it, though, and it is what you hear when you go out and visit the place, so that it's sort of it's real, is the digital aspect, and that seems to be a real thing. And I know that as a board we've got that high up the agenda, but I do think we should keep our minds on that. It's sort of something digital seems to be really, really strong themes that overall we should think about, as well as those individual bits. So yeah, I think it's really positive actually. We shouldn't be complacent, but I think it's a journey. When you think about where things were known to be a long time ago as well, I think that's really a credit to the leadership and the staff. Good.
Anything further on?
Nick? No, just a brief follow up on digital actually. It's not an easy area, but I've got to say we're now approaching it together with our Barts colleagues in a really constructive way, trying to find the joint best solution, which wouldn't happen a while ago.
I think the only other thing that I would just mention at this point is we're currently working on a 1 to 24 midwife to birth ratios. The number of births are likely to go up, and therefore I think we might need to look as a board in terms of how we continue to invest in maternity services to keep to the 1 to 24. Because if we drift, we're at 7,000 births now. If we move much more to the 8,000 births and we leave the levels of midwives as they are, we will be moving back to 1 to 26, 1 to 27. So I think we will be having to come back to the board for further investment if those levels increase.
Good, thank you. Just before we move on to the next item, just a bit of reassurance for members of the public. Andy, as you're tweeting about the meeting, first of all, I'm sorry if you are in fact sitting on a chair, but there are some more over there.
I did study that. I will.
Yeah, okay, good. Number one. Number two, there are drinks available for those people who were here at the beginning of the meeting. Number three, the papers are available online for people who want them. And if you want to give us warning next time, if for people who aren't able to access papers online, I'm sure we could print them out, although you'll see that most members of the board don't have papers printed out, and it's obviously very, very costly to do that, but we'll provide you with a copy now. And number four, there is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions. It's on the agenda. And if you've got a question, when we come to it, I'll be happy to hear it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's move on then. Combined safeguarding summary annual reports, Catherine.
So you'll have the annual report. These obviously go through the Project Governance Steering Group and track on a quarterly basis. So this is just our end of year report that needs to be signed off by the board. I think the couple of things that I would like to comment on this report. Generally speaking, safeguarding is in a very healthy state in this organisation. We've got quite a large team. If we benchmark the teams against other organisations, we do have quite good numbers. We've had a real focus this year on learning difficulty and autism, and in January there was new training introduced, and our levels of people completing that training are now over 90%, which is really good, I think. So I'm very happy to take any questions, but I think that this is an area where we have a continual focus. We really believe that staff in the organisation are trained to a very high level now, and when you go around the wards, if you talk to staff about safeguarding, how to raise safeguarding alerts, how to help people with learning difficulties, there is quite a good knowledge in the organisation, which is probably very different to about 5 years ago.
Good, thank you. Questions or comments on this, Sue?
Great report and very positive data. Thank you, Catherine. I'm about to display my ignorance, so forgive me. Safeguarding obviously is a whole community issue, and I'm interested in how we join this up with our local authority colleagues and other NHS entities so we get the whole picture and safeguard holistically.
So we sit on the Tri-Borough Partnership Boards, which is both for children and adults, so that's local authorities, etc., all in that. We also work very closely with our voluntary sector, so particularly with things like learning difficulty and autism, we have multiple voluntary sector organisations who sit on our groups and develop our strategies with us, so we'll be actively working. If people have a disability or a learning difficulty, they need additional support as they come into the hospital, we have a process for people highlighting that they need that, and we also have passports that go in and out of the hospital that people in the community can complete, but come into the hospital with our patients, whether it's an outpatient tourism, and then we know their likes, dislikes, and how they like to be cared for.
It's really great, thank you.
Kathy, and then Anne.
Yes, thank you. I would just echo exactly what Susan. I think this is an excellent report, and I particularly highlighted the things like the checklist in the emergency department and the career map. I mean, these are great things, and you know, I think we should be obviously not complacent again, but I think that we should demonstrate here that they are demonstrating that this is a real focus for this organisation, and the numbers involved of things are just enormous, aren't they? So I think that's really positive, and obviously we will be seeing it on a quarterly basis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to build on Catherine's response to Sue's question there. So as well as all of the engagement that we're doing with those different parties, as Catherine outlined, we're obviously partners on each of the 3 place-based partnerships for Barking, Dagenham, Havering and Redbridge. And each of those partnerships is developing its quality approach and its safety approach in an aligned way. And Catherine's teams have played a very active role in supporting that. So the infrastructure that we've got is obviously fairly mature within the organisation compared to some of our partners in those partnerships. So we're supporting the development of that approach and that aligned approach within each of the places as well.
Linda, did you have your hand up? Or?
Yes, I did. Just
and then
thank you. I have just recently become the patient partner for learning disabilities, and I have been going through some of the training that is provided. I think it's worth mentioning that this trust is actually already making learning disability training mandatory in advance of the code of practice coming out nationally, so we are in advance. And it's also perhaps worth noting that we have service users who actually participate in training. So when level 3 training in particular is given, which is given to more senior staff, which is a 3-hour face-to-face event, we have service users who come along and actually participate in that training. So it provides a reality, if I can use that term, to actually, or senior staff to actually see and participate with people who are service users. So I think that's an incredibly positive thing, certainly as far as learning disability and autism is concerned.
Thank you. Ruth.
So kind of my comments kind of bridging slightly. So I think it's a really good report, and I think it shows in-house how well we're doing. I think what we do need to do is work on how we branch out back into the community. And that also then links in with digital, because what we can do is end up losing information on each admission, that you can end up having to redo things when actually we've already gained that information from a previous admission, but also so that we start communicating it outwards. So for example, as a GP, if you've gained that information as an inpatient, actually I want to know that too, so I can build on their care and then hopefully even prevent a hospital from admission, fingers crossed, if that's possible. And I think there's a lot of scope and excitement that can really move forward with this. So we can't just go, yes, we're really good in-house. Actually, I think we can, there's so much more scope that it's going to be really, really positive for this group of patients.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to people and culture then, and we start off with the report from the People and Culture Committee, Leslie.
Yeah, and sorry, it's a verbal report, but we only met on Monday. So we looked at the 2 key elements that we always look at as a committee. The first on leadership and culture, and deep diving into areas of the people framework, and we focused on education and training. And some really exciting work that's been done by Kenya and Leslie in terms of us becoming a provider of apprenticeships, which is really brilliant piece of work. It's about maximising the benefit of the apprenticeship levy that we have to pay anyway, and about actually us being able to both grow our own and develop our own staff in-house, but also to play that role within our local communities in terms of providing training and employment opportunities across the whole range of services we provide as an organisation. So a real twofold thing there. It's going to be launched later this month, and I think it's a really incredibly positive initiative and puts us as a trust in a really good place as being a provider, a training provider of our own apprenticeships. It's a huge step forward. Secondly, we looked at a piece of work on the STAR model, strategy and culture to support transformation, which is really about aligning the work we're doing on strategy, culture and transformation, and about creating a STAR team that will do that piece of work. So an integrated internal team to build the infrastructure that we need for that sustainable cultural change to happen within the organisation. And one of the things I think we all notice, and I know I bang on about, is we get sources of information from different places. So we've had the quality and safety report earlier on the agenda. We've got the performance report that comes up next. We've got patient data. We've got staff surveys. And what we intend through this approach is to aggregate some of that so it gives us a really clear picture of the areas where we actually need to improve, and then have a multidisciplinary team of people going in and working with staff, with service users to adopt that multidisciplinary approach to deliver the change that we need to do, and do it on the basis of we know where we need to go rather than waiting to be invited into areas. And I think that's going to be really important in terms of the change. And I think, as Anne said at the People and Culture Committee, it's going to be a great example of matrix working, where both Anne and Janine and other colleagues, Catherine and Mantra, are going to be playing leading roles in actually making sure we get teams of people working across the piece together to actually start to deliver the change that we all recognise we need to. We talked about recruitment as well, as we normally do our very close scrutiny of recruitment, and particularly looking at gender and ethnicity, and we are making some progress at bands A to C in terms of BAME staff, but then it stops. And we know we need to do more in the higher bands, and we know, and I think was a really clear message from the committee, which I know Alan is dealing with anyway, but it's probably helpful to what he needs to do to hear that clear message from the committee, is that we simply do not expect to see interview panels taking place where people either don't have diversity partners on the panel who are playing a proper role, not there for token reasons, and where the people on that panel have not been trained in presenting. And so those things need to happen, because that way we can actually start to ensure that we're really making progress in being an open employer and giving proper opportunities to all of our staff to progress in the organisation. It's the launch of the EDI steering group, which again I think is a really positive step forward, and something that Janine will be very involved in when she starts here. We had a very close look at the assurance framework and challenged poor old Alan and Anne as the leads on the workforce element of that. We know that there are a huge number of changes taking place across the organisation. We know we're doing a lot on recruitment, and we're doing a lot on culture change. We also recognise that we are investing in leadership and development. All of these things take time. So we are on the right trajectory, and I think the committee is satisfied that the trajectory is right. It's just that you can't change those sorts of things overnight. So we know we need to take that bit by bit. But as long as we're on the right trajectory, I think that is what is really important. And then there are 3 reports which are on the agenda. The Freedom to Speak Up report. Well, I've probably got some comments and questions at the time. On the Disability Equality Standard Action Plan, what I think is really positive about that is that has been co-produced with the staff network, who have been really involved in it. And what was really heartening, when you do the review at the end of the meeting, it's usually, oh, we finished on time, that was good. Actually, we had 3 really heartfelt comments from the member of staff that leads on equality, the co-chair of one of the networks, and a member of one of the other staff networks, all 3 saying that they actually felt that they were now genuinely able to get involved in the work of changing the culture of the organisation, and they felt that they were being listened to and involved by both Anne and Alan and staff in terms of how we're trying to make change in the organisation. And I think that's a hugely positive and heartening when you hear that staff genuinely are now feeling that they're able to influence the change. And then the 3rd report is the annual report and statement of compliance. And you'll be delighted to know that we have not had to have the 2 action plan this year. It's been allowed to bypass 4. So I think that's the general overview in those 3 seconds.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions on that before we move on to the reports that Leslie cites? Okay, let's move on then to the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian annual report. Alan, you're introducing. We also have Paul, and it was very good to have the opportunity, for me to have the opportunity to meet with Paul to talk about his work a couple of months ago. And thank you, Paul, for your efforts. Alan.
Thank you. So this is the annual report from 21-22, and this is by Paul. Just by way of information, this was tabled at PCC in June, but I think it's Jackie and Paul that had identified it and been possible. So apologies for the lateness of the meeting. As ever, it gives quite a detailed and real report into what goes on in this organisation, and I suppose in some of the discussions we've had in other groups that there's some no surprises here in relation to some of the things that Paul's identified and listening to our staff. I mean, from my view, the Green Speak Up Guardian plays a real important part in one, getting information to us, but also supporting staff through some of these issues. And I know that Sue and Paul meet regularly along with Sarah and others. And what the idea and intention is that once we get these information, we try and act on these things quite quickly. But the positive thing from the report from myself is that there's more individuals feel confident they are actually attending and meeting with Paul and others. But as you'll see in some of the feedback that's in the paper, is that it's about trying to deal with some of these complex issues to make sure that staff feel that they're being listened to and valued in the organisation. So a hard-hitting report, but nonetheless, as Leslie says, it's some of the things that we need to be dealing with and will take some time. But I'll hand over to you, Paul, if there's anything else you want to say.
Okay, thank you. As I was introduced there, I'm Paul Maxwell. I'm the lead Guardian working for the Guardian service and in partnership with BHR. I take the report as read, so I'm going to just provide an overview and take questions at the end. Over the last Spring Speak Up year, running between 1st of April 2021 and the 31st of March 2022, there was significant improvement in the numbers of concerns being raised, seeing the numbers actually triple from 49 to 141 in that year. The numbers of concerns being raised since April this year as well has also continued to be quite healthy, and I expect the numbers to be of a similar amount at the end of this Speak Up year. When measuring this total against other trusts of similar size, this is an above average amount for our size of trust. The large increase in the rate of new cases is likely in part to a renewed focus from BHR leadership in terms of partnering with the Guardian service, promoting speaking up. It's also due in part to colleagues passing on by word of mouth that the Guardian service is an effective option to help the trust listen and respond to concerns. It's also important to recognise that it's not a bad thing that these numbers are going up. It's actually a good thing. It's a positive thing that people are feeling more comfortable coming forward and know where to go to raise these concerns. It will also be taken, I think, as an indication that the freedom to speak up culture is improving. It obviously offers more opportunity for the trust for learning and improvements. And the majority of staff who chose to speak up for Guardian service, they came to us because they felt they were not being listened to, or were worried that they weren't going to be listened to, or had fear about potential reprisals, effectively detriments occurring to them, a variety of different detriments that may occur to them if they spoke up via other internal channels. Top three groups raising concerns were admin and clerical, allied health professionals, and nursing and midwifery. And as with other trusts across South East and London areas, the three most common themes for new cases were management issues, bullying and harassment, and system and process. And many of the concerns reported under these themes are fairly reflective of some of the things you get coming through staff survey networks and other networks. There were a few cases during this period where similar concerns were raised by multiple members within a particular department. Some of these concerns were raised anonymously, due in part to being fearful about potential reprisals and a belief that the trust would not take appropriate action. In almost all cases, the initial response from management has been fairly quick in terms of acknowledging the concern and beginning that dialogue to discuss potential pathways to improvement. But it's also true that in some cases, the actions planned to address these concerns have remained incomplete for many months, and many months after the concerns were first raised. Unfortunately, there have been some actions planned to address the concerns that took so long to complete that it did have quite a negative impact on those who raised the concerns in the first instance. In some cases, people reported they'd lost faith and confidence in the trust being able to deliver appropriate actions and support them. In some cases, some individuals have actually left the trust, and some disengaged from investigations as well as a result of how long it took to address these concerns. It's clearly potentially damaging for the speak up culture of VHR if staff feel frustrated with the quality and timeliness of measures being taken to respond to these concerns. But that being said, overall, I think the Freedom to Speak Up year was relatively progressive at VHR. A lot of excellent work has been done by the Trust in terms of promoting the value of speaking up and Freedom to Speak Up option provided by Guardian Service. There's also been some great support provided by executives and board members in helping drive the Speak Up agenda, and also helping in terms of finding those potential pathways to improve them. And all that is reflected, I think, in the increase in concerns coming to Guardian Service. And as I said earlier, they are continuing to rise, so it's still quite a healthy number of concerns coming through. I feel that the Trust is well positioned to further improve the Speak Up culture and generate more opportunities for learning and improvement. However, continued progress largely depends on how well the Trust can demonstrate it is listening by responding appropriately and with actions that are delivered in a timely fashion. As referred to in my recommendations, the Trust may benefit from reviewing its resources and methods for addressing concerns, particularly where there are concerns about issues that may be impacting a number of staff across departments. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Marta.
Thank you very much for the report. It really made some, I think, very interesting reading. And I was approaching it from the fact as an ex-auditor. This, to me, there are certain things that have been described in this report, which I would regard as recommendations, and therefore expect to see an action plan, and expect to hold management accountable and have timelines and deliver things and all sorts of really kind of basic things. But what I couldn't get a sense of from this report is, where is the accountability for the issues that are being raised in this report, and who in the executive team is actually getting hold of this, particularly when you talk about things like staff becoming disaffected, but because of the time it takes to investigate and to respond to issues. Sometimes things do take time, but with proper communication, it's possible to hold the individual's raised concern in the process. So what struck me is there's something, it's good to hear about these things, but there's something that we're not doing as well as we ought to be doing in closing the loop to benefit from the information we're getting, particularly if I understand the report properly, there seems to be some areas, some specific departments which you are aware of, or the Guardians are aware of, where we do have issues, and I'm wondering how we get that information in order to deal with it.
Well, I don't just highlight them in the report. I'm in dialogue with a number of people within the Trust. I won't go into specific cases now, but there are some works in progress, and as I mentioned, some of those works in progress have taken a lot longer than perhaps I'd like, or that the individuals within that process would like. But I lightly remind them that these things are still unclosed, and I do that on a regular basis. And sometimes it might be down to resources, not the right time, but there are, I do keep raising it with people who do have the authority to address these things.
I'm going to take Leslie, and then we'll come back to Alan on executive accountability and next steps and response. Leslie.
Yeah, I mean, part of my question was to Alan with that hat on.
Okay.
And partly picking up your point, Mark, I think this is one of the bits of soft intelligence when I was talking about the STAR work, transformation work earlier, that we need to put into that whole intelligence gathering that points us towards particular areas of the organisation where we need to intervene, because it's rare that one bit of data only highlights one bit of the organisation. Most bits of data have the same repeatedly. I suppose my question to Alan is really firstly about the resourcing of investigating the issues that come up, because I know Sue feels this too, that there's a sort, and it comes through Paul's report, there's an element of frustration amongst staff that things take a long time to investigate, even though we know things sometimes do take a long time to investigate. And secondly, it's a question about the investment that we're making in things like management leadership training and particularly communication skills, because a lot of these issues could be nipped in the bud if actually we had people in the organisation who were better able to talk to and listen to their staff, rather than ending up in situations of conflict. And I suppose my final point is we get quarterly reports at PCC from Paul and his colleagues, so we do listen to what Paul says and do hold Alan probably to more account than he can.
Alan.
Yep, so I am the accountable officer for this piece of work. And we do report to PCC. We have employee relations, information, and data. We break that down by diversity as well. So we do report in a bit more detail. And it's a fair point in relation to the paper that Paul provided, is that there is a response to the actions and the recommendations in the report. And it's certainly something I'm more than happy to share with the board if they feel that's quite an important issue to discuss. But nonetheless, there's actions that are taking place. The main thing really is around the way that we're managing the cases, so the just culture principles that we're bringing in as part of a priority for the employee relations activity that we're doing. In relation to the resources, it's quite interesting because we do a bit of both. We're still very much manager-led and undertaking investigations. So an internal investigation, and us manage it and amongst managers and others is the way that we deal with that, and that's how we're resourced to do it. So the HR function isn't necessarily resourced to do the investigations and manage the cases. That manages to undertake the casework. But we also split it as well, that we have external investigators that we contract with. And sometimes they take just as long, and it's quite an interesting concept sometimes, that we're actually paying external contractors who take a long time in doing these investigations for a number of reasons, and there is a number of reasons why these things do take some time, sadly. So I think the resource is right if we want to work on that basis. Some other organisations have brought everything in centrally, and it's all managed that way, which will mean more resource implications for a workforce team. But I do think there's a lot of learning that we've done certainly from conversations with Paul about how we communicate with individuals going through these cases, and that's been probably the biggest learning from my team, is that we've assigned an employee relations advisor to someone who's gone through the process, not necessarily just supporting the manager going through the process as well. So there's a lot of things that we've done, and as I say, I'm more than happy to feed that back in a bit more detail. So I think with the right number, again, if we look at the BARTS team, and again, we set up very similar to how we operate as well. And again, when we do new policies or amend the policies, we do the training that goes out to managers. But we do need to do a bit more of that coming out of COVID periods. We still haven't really set up a significant training package for the managers and some of the performance management things. So again, that's one of the actions that we need to do. But as I say, I think the information is there about how we're doing. But sadly, there are some cases that take a long time for a variety of reasons. It's not all of them, which is the good news. But certainly, it's the ones which take longer, the ones that I've spoken about, and that's one case too many.
Matthew.
Yeah.
So.
there's a really important point in all this about quality of local management and the confidence of local management to deal with it. And we had a really good away day with staff side in the networks a couple of months ago. And this kept coming up from them actually, that so many, it's a bit like the complaints issue earlier. Lots of stuff becomes formal because the people who deal with instances in the first case don't have the confidence to deal with it. And anecdotally as well, people have said sometimes it's because there's issues to do with race as well, or discrimination that are raised. And some managers don't feel confident having a conversation with two members of staff where there's alleged discrimination or alleged racism between them. And they prefer to say, let's get HR involved. You know, let's write to HR because they feel as though it gives them a layer of perspective in what can be quite a difficult conversation as well. So I think there's an overall issue both about the core competence of the line managers, which we're trying to address through training programs over the next year, but also about how we work more effectively with staff side of the networks to allow people to be more confident about dealing with different issues head on. It's a good report, and I think Paul is a really powerful, critical friend actually in terms of trying to get trust in the right space.
Okay. Ruth, have you got your hand up?
Yes.
Yes. So Sue and then Ruth.
So to some extent, Matthew's stolen my thunder. So I wanted to pay tribute to the rigour and the frankness that we get through the service that Paul provides us. And he does speak truth to power, and that is painful, and it's important that the board hears what Paul's saying. And Alan, not only is he under the auspices of P&C, he does get me as the FTSE champion, sending him emails on a fairly regular basis. So there is certainly at board a significant focus on supporting freedom to speak up. But it is important for us to realise that we start from a pretty low base point. So what Paul is describing around the volumes being higher than average, that's good because we're moving in the right direction. But what I really wanted to say was my learning from the intelligence that I get from Paul, all of the things about speeding up our investigation work, etc. But I am always of the view that the glass is half full, and the people in this organisation want to do the right thing always. And I am not sure that we have necessarily equipped them with the tools to do the right thing at all times. So often when we talk anonymously about cases and lessons from cases, there is something about equipping our managers, middle managers, junior managers with the knowledge, the skills, the expertise, and having given them the opportunity to practice in a safe space so that when it becomes real, they are less a rabbit in the headlights of a tricky situation. And I know that there is a training program in development, in implementation. So I just think it's really important that we really give people space, safe space to practice being managers before they have to do it in earnest. So to factor that into our training programs. Thank you.
Ruth.
So I don't want to duplicate things. So I agree with everything so far, but the thing that worried me slightly was on the new cases by job group, that medical and dental were only 3. And what I wanted to understand is that because they're being dealt with and therefore not coming to the Guardian service, or is it there's a concern that they are not speaking up, particularly as trainees, because they rotate and therefore feel I'll stick with it because I'm going to move on, or actually they're worried about their training, because that is some of the reflection that came in from the GMC survey. And is that somewhere as a board we do need to focus? Because I think the culture shift in the very permanent staff is shifting, that there is far more of this freedom to speak up. But have we got that right? It's particularly the training. So that was to you.
Yeah, so I think with the trainees, they probably go to the Guardian of Safe Working route, and the issues are raised through Guardian of Safe Working. And from the time I've joined, me or my deputy have attended every one of those meetings with the junior doctors. So I think probably they may not be approaching Paul as trainees. I'm surprised there are 3 because I'm probably doing a bit more with them, and Paul's been really supportive in trying to manage some of the cultural issues with the consultant body. So you've got trainees that go to Freedom to Speak Up. The consultants, it's one, it's usually a group. We've got quite a few consultant teams in mediation through, so that I kind of think the issues that have been raised are being tackled. I'm not aware of the 3 individual ones. There are some themes that I meet on a weekly basis with Paul, so yeah.
I can add to that actually. The numbers have significantly increased since that report. So that report covers the period up to the end of March this year. Obviously, the next 6 months, I'm currently writing a report, an update report, based on that last 6 months, and they have gone up like from that category. And as quite rightly says, we've done a lot of work meeting those individuals on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I noticed bullying and harassment being raised more often in successive years, which may reflect reporting. It may reflect new systems, but it may reflect problem. And then I see that you map 26 of those cases to the corporate directorate. Is there a pattern in how they map? Is there a particular group of staff or a single staff member that they map to? What is going on here?
Yeah,
Because there's not an even distribution of these.
Yeah.
And it's not clear why they map strongly to one group.
Yeah, without talking about specific cases and identifying individuals, there are a couple of cases that were effectively like lawsuits, like a number of people raising concerns about the same individual, the same issues from the same department, and so that would speak to why the numbers peaked like in that particular directorate. But there are more people coming forward, and I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing an increase as well. More people are feeling more comfortable coming forward. They know they've got an option. Obviously, the option that they've got with us as well is they can come and talk it through in the first instance in a confidential, safe space to talk things through before going anywhere else. And in some cases, people talk to us, and we can talk through some options, potential pathways to improvement, and it might help them, to go away and address the issue themselves or get themselves ready for a meeting or whatever. But so they don't all go to where I need to escalate it and it becomes an investigation. In some cases, an individual might recognise, well, actually, it's not really a bullying and harassment issue; it's something else. It's a management relationship. But there are some cases, and some of the cases that I've already referred to earlier today, that are still work in progress as well, not completely resolved yet.
Yeah, that's exactly why I asked what I had, because some people interpret a reasonable line management instruction to be harassment if it's not something they want to do. So, so it's good that they're going up because it suggests that you've established through your safety initiative a safe place where people can test things. Because 39 seems too few to me. Must be more people who feel that way.
Yeah, I mean the numbers are. Sometimes it's just knowing there's somewhere to go, there's somewhere safe to go and talk it through. And although we do lots of promotion, I do lots of walkarounds, not everyone wants to come forward straight away. Go back a couple of times. Second visit, someone says, it's
that's very impressive.
So it's definitely a work in progress. You might see more information coming out. We will see more information coming out this next year. And as I said, I think moving in the right direction, more people coming forward. Just the issue is, can the trust address these things in the right way, in a timely fashion?
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Paul. And it will be interesting to see the trajectories and the progress as we compare your reports over time. But thank you very much for the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Okay, Workforce Disability Equality Standards Action Plan. Board members will remember that we did the Workforce Race Equality Standards Action Plan in September, and today we're doing the Disability Action Plan. And Alan, I think you're introducing.
Yeah, so safe to say it's another challenging report with the contents of the results from the information from standards. So it's suffice to say that there's some challenges again about how we manage and some of the feedback from our staff in relation to those who find themselves as being disabled and their experience in the organisation. So the report is obviously based on last year's figures. That said, I'm still particularly optimistic about how we're managing this over the previous few months and going into the future. As Leslie touched on, there seems to be a real energy across the PCC team and those who attend in relation to what we're doing with respect to the work by the networks and staff side analytics. So I hope next year when we do report back, we'll see some improvements in statistics, but nonetheless, I think there's a lot of good work that's happening in the organisation now. I wouldn't mind so I could just go through some of that. The Ability Not Disability Network is really grown, so there's very good attendance, and we've got 2 excellent chairs, co-chairs, who manage the network. And I attend, I'm the SRO of the executive, and it's quite hard hearing some of the stuff debated at the meeting. And they do, similar to the board, they have a lived experience of a staff member who tells a story at each of the meetings, and often involves HR practice, lack of empathy, lack of understanding, and all those aspects. So I've encouraged my employee relations team to make sure that they attend and they hear these things, and ask managers to come along as well, because I think no matter how you're trying to manage a process through sickness, absence, or whatever, it's about how that individual may feel in relation to some of the things that they believe to be perceived. And some of the learning that we've got from that is that we have a sickness absence process that we manage people through, and what we're not doing is listening to people when we're managing through that process. And some of the literature that we have in those policies is pretty uncaring and unsympathetic, but could be added to. So a perfect example is someone who just develops quite a serious condition. All of a sudden we manage that individual through a sickness absence process, and as I said, the lack of empathy that may be perceived through that process. So again, it's about learning from that, about how we manage that. Again, just culture principles I think will really help us do that. The biggest challenge in the organisation is the issue around reasonable adjustments, and that's the biggest thing that comes out. And as I said at PCC, we're an organisation which is big enough to have a high number of staff with disabilities working in its organisation. But when you're kind of a line manager to one person on your ward or in your team, and that seems a problem for your efficiency, about how you work the roster, etc. So it becomes a problem, and it's about trying to tackle those individual aspects and take some of that pressure away from managers. So we are going to centralise the reasonable adjustment budget and to make sure that the staff don't have to have that worrying discussion with the manager who said, I can't afford this, and it's part of law. But it just takes the pressure away from those discussions. So we've seen good practice in other organisations, so we're setting that up. So we're having a reasonable adjustment policy, which will hopefully advise managers about those kind of processes and take that pressure off. We're also going to introduce a disability support advisor. So what we've heard also is when staff come into the organisation, they come with a disability, there's very good support. So we felt it was really good to have an advisor to work with staff coming into the organisation, but also to work with staff who have got disabilities and having some struggles in relation to the working environment as well. So we're going to have someone from the network who's going to take that role up as well, which would be really positive. So there's a number of things that we're doing. I'm pretty confident we're doing some of the right stuff. As I say, we attended a seminar across at West London recently, where all the things that were highlighted by best practice and some of the things that we're looking to introduce. And so, as I say, with the networks and the staff side support, we just need to do that bit more education with managers again, and to try and identify some of the issues about disability and how people can work in the organisation with disabilities, and then try to say the main thing I think is to take that adversarial approach when we're trying to deal with some of these issues. And make it more of a positive environment for staff with disabilities. Because we've got a duty, as I think, as a public sector organisation, to make sure that we welcome staff with disabilities into this organisation. So we're very committed to driving some of these changes through the next few months, and quite excited actually about what we're doing.
Kathy.
Thank you. I think a helpful report. I know we have to do it, but it's a helpful report in such an important area. Can I just be a bit a bit irritating about the table of where you've got things that are red and amber and green and so on. And it just strikes me that there is a potential within that. We might miss some of the really important things because, you know, if you say you put red, it's up in the wrong direction. I think what is also the subtlety is how is that against the non-disabled, which is also risen. So actually it's something about the gap. And it just feels as though it needs a bit better, more sort of subtle interpretation than just an amber or red or whatever rating. So I think there's quite rich things in that that is not kind of, you're probably doing it elsewhere, but it's just not being drawn out. And I just fear that we're missing something important because, you know, if we think that, for example, harassment and bullying, I mean, nobody would say that 32% was a good number of people, a third of people generally, and then 39% is obviously worse. But do you see what I mean? I'm saying it's just, yeah. I just don't want us to lose, I'm sure you will in the background be looking at it, but I just struggle a bit with some of the, I had to over-interpret, extra-interpret.
And so do I, but it's a standard template that all trusts complete this way. So, but we hopefully in the action plan you see some of the things that we're looking to do in response to it. But I do get the point about whether it's. I always work on the basis that there's no point trying to be defensive about something going the wrong way, and even if it means for non-disabled staff as well. So I think it's quite stark, but I take your point that it's a kind of standard provide. You can then contrast and compare with other organisations.
Mark.
I mean, I may have missed this in the report. I'm sure with Kathy, there's probably more granularity lying underneath this. And sometimes when we report things in the same way as others do, we miss stuff. So one thing that some other places have done is to appoint disability advocates. So somebody who actually advocates for the disabled person who isn't line managed inside HR, but reports at a high level and therefore is by definition given quite a lot of power to act for the individual. And that sometimes helps to break a chain of events where people are following a formula or a process, but it's not really appropriate to the individual. They're doing their job and technically they're doing it in roughly the right way, but in fact, the way they're doing it is insensitive to the situation because they're following a series of rubrics that don't apply. And that's where I think an advocate can step in and say, hang on a minute, you need to think about this, this and this here, and then be an intermediary that then sort of helps the organisation to adjust that. It may be worth just considering, and perhaps you have that in the plan and I've missed it.
Yeah, so that is part of the plan.
Okay.
And we really want this to be driven by the network as well. And there's some quite strong leaders there who will help in that process. But yeah, we're bringing something like that in.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Let's move on. I'm going to do item 18, and then I'm going to give people a sort of 5-minute comfort break before we move on to the finance and operational performance. So, Mamta.
So this is a report that needs board approval. So we have NHSC had suspended appraisals during the period of COVID and expects that every 3 years we do an audit of our appraisals and the PDP. So we have what's a PDP? Personal Development Plan. So we have it in our appraisal document as to what we are aspiring or how they meet trust objectives or what objectives we expect an individual person to meet. We have roughly 760 consultants and trust grade doctors that are expected to fulfill the process that we do, the appraisal process, which is electronic within BHRUT. And so we've audited 76 of them in terms of the quality. So there's a score that we've received, against which we're supposed to grade between 0 to 2, and you give them marks in terms of the quality, the amount of reflection, the quality of the PDP, and whether that reflects the scope of work the person who is being audited has done. So we've heard, I think there are some good things in terms of our compliance rates are better than a lot of organizations. We're roughly about 85% of the people
have had an appraisal in here, and since this is the first year post-COVID, I expect that that's going to look better. But there is some concerns around the quality of the appraisals in terms of the detail that is available there. So what we have roughly 100 appraisers trained at BHRUT to do appraisals, and there are some who've done really good appraisals and some who are incredibly poor. So as part of the, we need to submit this report. I think it looks average, not of concern, but there's definitely a lot more we could do, particularly around the objectives that we expect an individual doctor that he or she needs to meet within the organisation. So, happy to take any questions. Okay.
Has your revalidation officer not raised that matter, the quality of the data? So when we revalidate every 5 years, it relies on a number of things, of which the appraisal is a key component, and lack of detail is a reason why the revalidation officer cannot submit to the GMC.
So we've got a new, so we're both new in post, the responsible officer and myself, and we've not done this for over 5 years, Mark. So I think the benchmark is probably not going to be correct. I'm not aware of the revalidation, the comparator.
No problem.
Sorry.
No worries.
Okay, good. So that has also been to People and Culture Committee, so we will take that as able to go on to the next stage now. Right, it is 2:28, so let's return at 2:35, or we gather at 2:35. We are up to the report back from the Finance, Investment and Performance Committee, and Marta, you will be doing this in Mahboob's absence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm pleased to say there's people in the there's a note in today's papers, so I'm just going to highlight what I think were the issues that the board needs to be aware of. There are 2 meetings that are being reported on in this particular board meeting. A number of the papers that we looked at on the 28th of December were for either for information or for endorsement. In the October meeting, a number of those were for assurance. And I think the one that colleagues were talking progress in getting to the point that we would like to get to in terms of the deficit position for the end of the year, we would hope, the committee would hope that that continues to improve so we can land the year end where we would like to, because this clearly has an impact on our overall cash position. And we did note issue that was I raised earlier in the meeting today with respect to the cost of providing security for mental health patients where they are in the hospital for a much longer time than we would ideally like them to be. And I'm happy to take any other questions.
So,
just to add to that, I unfortunately wasn't at the 28th of September meeting, but did attend the 26th of October. I think it's important for the board, and I'm sure Nick will highlight this, to recognise that the financial trajectory has shifted for the first time in my memory of being on the Finance Committee. And it shifted in a positive direction, which is fantastic to note. I just wanted to tease out a little bit around the bullet point about mitigations to ensure patient safety following delay in implementation of the EPMA. So we agreed as a board to roll the EPMA implementation into the EPR implementation, which pushed back the date. And in the business case for EPMA, we'd highlighted a number of organisational risks that the EPMA would resolve. Sala has worked really hard, supported working with Manta, with Catherine, to come up with mitigations to make sure we continue to be safe, even though we've added a bit more time into the case. But we as a committee asked if that could be costed in a way that means that we can put the money aside and fund it. But I think we made some good progress on that conversation, so I was pleased to note that. And then the estates and digital strategies, I think those are both very important pieces that play to our back risk. So as a committee, that was the focus we had on BAF, to reassure ourselves that we had a direction of travel around estates and a direction of travel around digital. and it feels like we are now moving in the right direction. There was a bit more refinement to do, but it was very positive. And then the last thing I'd like to highlight, we are required to do a NHS financial sustainability piece of work, a self-assessment on how sustainable we are. I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, but we've got an indicative internal self-assessment of 3, which is about right. We're in the middle, but we're waiting on our auditors to validate that, and more importantly for us, I think, to benchmark it and give us some data that we can learn and get better as a result of. So I just thought from that committee, those are the things I would like to highlight to the board. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on to the performance report then. And we're going to come back to finance after that. So Caroline, I think Caroline and Matthew doing the performance report.
We are, thanks Jackie. So we've had a bit of an improvement in our overall performance, but I think our type 1 performance for September at Queen's and KGH remains lower than we would like. So begs the question as to what we're doing about it. So what we're doing is we're going to make, or are making, significant changes through our urgent and emergency care pathway. In the paper, we make reference to Project Snowball, which is our proactive movement of patients away from ED through to our assessment units. That's really been very helpful, particularly for elderly patients who are moved out of ED more quickly than they were, and they move into our frailty unit. So we've seen a really big increase in the number of patients that move through our frailty unit, and the amount of time that they stay in the hospital has decreased significantly, which is great. So the other thing you'll notice when you walked around is that we have a busy atrium, and that's because we have working with PALC, we changed the way that patients are seen by us that come in through the UTC. So what that's meant is that patients are staying with PALC and are being dealt with by PALC rather than moving around to RED. That means that over the next couple of weeks, we are going to make more changes. So what we're going to do is increase our same-day emergency care space so that we'll be able to see more patients more quickly. And we are going to be opening a surgical assessment unit on level 2 in what was the old discharge lounge area. So those are some significant changes for us over the next few weeks. They've taken a lot of time to plan, and they will improve flow through the hospital for patients and reduce the amount of time that patients are waiting. So that's all happening on the Queen's site. What we're going to be doing at KGH is similar but different. We're unable to make quite the same changes from a Snowball perspective at KGH because of the layout of the hospital. But what we are going to be doing is opening an area that has been shut called Clover. That will be our same-day emergency care area. And we've made some estates improvements to that over the last few months. So I'm confident that we're going to see a decrease in the amount of time that people are waiting. However, it is taking us quite a few months to get this underway. But as Matthew, I think, said at the start, it's good to see that we're planning and actually executing plans and they're coming to fruition. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, just a quick one. Thank you for that. And you mentioned the PALC. I walked around with Catherine the other evening, and the experience for patients couldn't be described as a good one. So it's good to hear that there are next step plans, but I think it would be really good to see that really come to fruition as soon as possible, because you know, it didn't look like a really great area to be waiting in. I don't know if that's worse because of the interim arrangements or not, but it's good to know that you've got sort of more substantial plans.
Yeah, we have, and I think the other thing you'll notice is at the moment we have kids and adults in the atrium area, and we're going to shift the children round to enter the hospital in a different way. So we separate those streams, which will decongest the atrium.
Yeah, Matthew.
There's an important dimension with the urgent treatment centre here, which is, you know, we're the only hospital in North East London, I think one of the only ones in London that doesn't commission its own urgent treatment centre. So, for example, you know, in Barts, there's a direct relationship between the trust and the provision of urgent care and treatment for non-emergency department patients. Because of the way things were set up here, for whatever reasons, there isn't that same thing. Now, we've been working very well with Steve Rubery, who's the chief executive of PELC, and he's been working with us to try to make sure we get those pathways running as smoothly as possible. But I do find myself regularly having to explain to people who use our services that when you walk into Queen's as a walking patient, you're not seen by BHRET. Your experience until you arrive at the majors department is not a provider that we have any formal relationship with, other than the fact that they're referring to us as well. So we haven't, it's difficult because in terms of the CQC emergency department patient experience survey, people waiting for PELC complete those surveys and submit them, and it's reflected as a Queen's one. And it feels it's a difficult conversation to have with patients who are down there saying, what are you doing about this? You know, we don't want to turn around and say this isn't our service, but it isn't our service. And we've been talking to the ICB about how we try to manage that together in a more effective way, because I think the waits down there at the minute are very long, often. They're very poor patient experience, and I think it's something all of us would like to see improve.
I think just if I might just come back to that. So I completely agree with you, and I know it's not our run service, but at the end of the day, everybody is part of our population, and we're responsible for the patients. So, you know, whatever we can do to work collaboratively or whatever to improve that, you know, nobody could describe it as a, and also where it is as you come in the front, it's not a patient area really, it's something else. So it feels like an urgent matter to solve.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, and you know, I mean, when you stand at the top of the stairs and you regularly see a very full area, it's something that we've been working on over the last couple of weeks. So we will be moving the children out of that area. That will decongest it significantly, because children never come here on their own. So it'll be easier. But also I think what we've got to be clear about is that PELC expanded into that area post-COVID, I think, because there was a lot of movement around the configuration of the hospital in that area. I'm looking at Nick because I think it has moved around quite a bit, isn't it?
Correct.
So definitely something that's high on the agenda.
Ruth?
I think it's only just to bring to the board that there's other things then also changing in the community. So enhanced access, which used to be called extended access, but was more surgery level, but was very ad hoc. So some surgeries would sign up to it, some surgeries wouldn't sign up to it. It was like an extra contract. That's now being grouped into PCN level, and they're delivering that at hub sites. So I think the hope is there's some people that potentially would have gone to PELC or A&E that actually will be shifted into that service. But it is still at its infancy, and we're also having problems with employing enough staff to cover it. And I think probably as a trust, we should start working with those hubs to try and do some better coverage of staff where possible, because also I think it would give the hubs some confidence of when the referral is required to go up to A&E, and I think some of that would then get stopped if they felt there was people in that hub service that says, no, actually, A&E is not going to be the next, you don't need to go this extra layer, or in fact, they can streamline in. So if it's a child that they see, that we're not then sending a child from a hub all the way through child A&E, actually they can go straight to observation ward. So I think that's to come, but unfortunately I think we have to move at speed at it because the time is winter, isn't it? So if we're going to do it, I think we've got to try and do that over the next couple of months.
Did you want to add something overall on this?
I mean, this is a huge concern going into the winter. I think, you know, we can see right across the emergency care pathway, and actually across urgent care and primary care, that, you know, I think primary care in North East London is seeing more patients than it did before the pandemic. You know, the numbers are up hugely. We know from the work we did with Ipsos Mori and audits that PELC themselves have done, that a significant amount of people that arrive at both of our hospitals are people who could see someone through scheduled primary care. I think PELC's data suggests close to 40% of the people that walk in to an acute hospital site could be seen in a scheduled primary care appointment as well. And that then has an ongoing pressure on their ability to see people who genuinely meet the criteria for urgent care and treatment, and that then spills into the ED. So all these things are a domino effect. From the patient perspective, what it means is what should be a 4-hour maximum experience is often a 6, 8, 12-hour experience. It often, in cases when the site gets very busy, can tip over to far in excess of that, and that creates crowded conditions, poor patient experience, and poor outcomes. This will remain a a real focus for us over the course of the winter. And then I'm sure that as a board we'll be discussing this at every one of our board meetings. So next.
Did you also want to do plan?
I'm Fiona. Yeah, so apologies for Fiona, so they can't be with us today. So just to say, we're making good progress on our waiting list. The overall size of our patient waiting list, which was I think around 65,000 in the summer, it's now come down to around 62,500. So we're starting to see that waiting list shrink. The number of very long waiters, back in July, we had, I think, around 460 people waiting over 78 weeks for their treatment. That's now down to 80, and most of them are booked. And we're expecting to soon see that fall down to low figures and to start really pushing in November to 52-week waiters. And so we have been in this position the last few years where pre-pandemic 52-week waiters were very much small numbers right across London. That's gone in the opposite direction for reasons we all understand, but we're starting to step in the other direction, which is good. Our 18-week performance remains stable, which is around 59%, and that's against a target of 92%. But the reason that that's staying stable while the overall numbers are coming down is because we're working on the very long waiters. So the 18-week numbers aren't going to start to shift significantly until we start taking the tail off that. But that's because there are humps in the waiting list beyond 18 weeks. So we want to make sure we get through on the basis of clinical need and length of wait, because we understand the impacts that these long waits have on people. But there's some really good discipline going into the waiting list and management of that just now. So we've still got these 2,000 or so 52-week waiters, but you will see that starting to come down in the course of November into December, and we're working with Barts and the Homerton to make sure that for some of these pathways we manage them right across North East London. So for example, we're really compromised in gynecology capacity, and actually the Homerton are helping us out with that. There's other pathways where Barts are helping, likewise we're providing mutual aid in the other direction where we think we're able to manage that as a group. And our diagnostic waiting list, the DMO1, is the subject of a lot of focused work to improve waiting times, particularly around MRI, CT and ultrasound as well. At the minute, that's supposed to be a 1% of patients wait more than 6 weeks, and we're running at around 25%. And there are capacity issues there. Biggest risk is reporting on the scans, so we can get the scans done, but we don't necessarily have the staff to do the reporting on them. So we have been outsourcing some of that, try to get those numbers moving in the right direction again, and also the radiologist time to report as well. And we are having a look at some of our other internal hospital pathways, actually, because quite a lot of our radiology capacity is taken up by emergency capacity within the hospital, and then some areas we're an outlier for the number of scans we refer to certain pathways. So we're trying to pull them back down so we can do more work there around that longer waiting. Cancer waiting times are a worry, I think, across London in some respects at the minute. Our 2-week wait performance isn't where we want it to be, and that's been increased referrals for suspected skin cancers, which we're seeing as a regional issue. So our performance isn't where we want it to be there, but we're working with the Cancer Alliance to help us increase that capacity. And actually on the faster diagnosis standard, we're above target. We're doing very well in this trust and across North East London on that front. So making sure patients are triaged and sent through for suspected cancers. But then once people are in the pathway, it's taking longer than long for people to get that definitive treatment and to get them off at the back end. So there's a couple of pathways we're compromised on it, but we're working hard to get that back into space. Likewise with 62 days, we're looking at waiting list backlog to try and get diagnosis and care through. And we've got about 289 patients in that backlog, and we're having weekly scrutiny on that to try to get it back to where we want to be. And the current performance on 62 days is lower than 70%. But where again, once we've seen those longest waiters come through, we'll see that heading back in the right direction. So lots of good work going on there. And to get the overall PTL starting to come down after a period where it's just been going up and up is really been good to see. It's some fantastic work with both clinicians and ops and admin people and surgery to get back into that situation.
Good, thank you. Finance, Nick.
Tomorrow, hand over to Mike, please. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so the numbers we talked about on month 6, so half 1. So we were off plan by 19.5 million. That includes £6 million of the elective recovery fund income that we've returned. So that money sits within the ICS still. So what we're focused on is 13.5 million. So we're expecting to get that 6 back. Of the 13.5 million, about half of that variance is because we haven't yet got the delivery on the banking agency premium savings that we're looking for. But we've seen a good improvement in Q2 versus Q1. So the annualised number now of what we're saving is worth about £8 million. So we're about a third of the way to where we want to be getting to. So that's good progress. We've also seen around our non-clinical supply spend, there's been a stabilisation of the variance. It's stayed at about 2 million now for the last 3 months. And a lot of that is good progress around the security spend. Where we are still seeing growth in the variances in our other non-pays, we know that we're continuing to buy additional capacity to support our electric recovery programme through renting theatres. And we're not yet delivering on our non-pay savings as we would want to. We've put additional steps in there with additional control measures and meetings on Monday to review purchase orders, for example, over 100,000. So they're the main reasons. Within the finance report, it does show quite nicely on a trend slide that we've seen the average monthly deficit in quarter 1 of 3.3 reduced to 2.2. So that's the improvement that we're seeing, which is really good news in the tough context. And when we're tracking our compliance for SOC 4, which is our kind of our red, amber, green graph, we have bent that solid black line from outside the red zone and into the red zone, which sounds like green shoots, and it is. But if we can carry on our forecast trajectory, that will get us into the amber zone and just touching the green zone by the end of the year, and that's our £21 million adverse variance. So that's all good signs. We should hopefully be in the amber zone in quarter 3. That's what we're aiming to do. Now, from a cash perspective, there's a cash forecast slide, and what it shows is if we deliver that forecast, our cash balances as we go into quarter 4 will be £20-ish million, which is better than history, but not great. We do have the lowest cash balances in London, and it just emphasises the fact we need to deliver on this recovery for our cash balances to be where we need them to be. So some good shoots. We just need to carry on that track. Sorry, I should have said as well, month 6 was £1 million ahead of where we had forecast to be when we did the month 5 forecast.
Thank you. Kathy?
Just a quick one. I like your little slide on the health check, the little lozenges, because it's helpful. Just one that you could help unpack is the one on financial recovery requires 85% utilisation of theatres, and then we've got numbers of 74 and 77%. So what degree of confidence have we got that we're going to do what it says we must do?
Yeah.
Which probably links to, I guess, some of the operation, or not yours, but Fiona's operation.
Yeah. So what we're doing so far is we're actually using about 9 out of every 10 theatre staff, but we're using 74% of that is for our own staff or through substantive non-premium costs. We're getting to 90 for the pound waiting list initiative. We're using 9 out of 10, which is great, and then we're using 75% of the time of every session productively. What we want to do is use every session and use 85% of that time. So Fiona's got some really nice graphs in her normal pack actually, which shows which service lines are doing really well and where there's good improvement. So lots of work through that team, and we've seen good improvement. What we need to do now through planning is crack the workforce capacity alignment to physical capacity alignment, because that's where we do get into every session.
Okay.
So if Fiona hat on again, what's interesting about our waiting list is actually we're almost at the point where surgical activity and non-surgical weights are pretty much in even proportions in terms of that 63,000. So that there's lots of weights within that waiting list for specialist medicine. So in women and children's health, other areas of stock med as well. So we are having, so I think that there's a tendency for all of us, and I do it myself, where we think about theatres and operations. Actually, but the vast majority of people on our waiting list are waiting for outpatient procedures or outpatient appointments to happen. And actually, for the surgeons themselves, part of our challenge is persuading them to do a bit less operating and to do more outpatient clinics. Actually, because actually for the weight of the waiting list we've got, including the over 52 waiters, I think around 2/3 of them are actually not waiting for an operation; they're waiting for an outpatient procedure or an outpatient appointment. So in balance as a whole, that 63,000 holds quite a lot of detail within it. And we do have a very strong set data that we run through the performance committee that shows how all this stuff works.
Yes, really. It was just really build on Matthew's note of by having the outpatient appointment, it would make such an impact also in primary care, because it feels like they have hope that they're now on the treadmill, they're now moving forward, rather than when they call up appointments, it's just you're on a list, and they don't understand this list or how quick that can move. And I think the appointments team often don't understand the list and how quick that can move. So by doing that, at least they then have a hope and a focus of when they can possibly get booked. And then I think they're also less likely to come through our front doors, because they often will think that is a way of making things happen quicker. And in fact, we'll just lie about symptoms, frankly, to make that happen quicker. And we see that in primary care. So if we can escalate that to be a priority, I think the knock-on effect will be really significant across the whole system.
Yeah, we lost a lot of outpatient rooms in the last couple of years, actually. I think around, is it around 30?
Wow.
Figure I've had quoted to me, and because of service changes that were made during the pandemic. So there's been a lot of physical space lost, and some of the work we want to do around the front door will give us more of that back. And the St George's development as well, just a few years down the line, will be a huge benefit in terms of outpatient capacity. There's probably more we can do at King George as well around outpatients. And we've got, to your point, Ruth, about where else people go. We did some audit work last winter. We found that 3 out of 5 of people who were arriving as emergency surgical admissions were on our waiting list for surgery. And actually talking to Jagan and some of our other associate medical directors from primary care, they see quite a lot of their caseload as people waiting for a procedure. And we've seen this in the ONS data. We've got a higher number of 50-year-olds out of work now. We, because of long-term illness in the country than at any time in history, actually. And lots of these folk, I think, we've raised this at North East London level and waiting lists somewhere. The third thing is we are doing some really good work out at King George's around waiting lists for the trust. And there's now a helpline that people can phone up to find out where they are, and GPs use that quite a lot actually, and to find out where their patients are. We've also been running a pilot for phoning people up in the week before their appointment as well, and that's reduced our do not attends for our patients' appointment from 15% down to 9% for the clinics that's been run on. So you get a phone call from someone, looking forward to seeing you next week, this is the information you need. Just that contact is starting to make a difference on getting people through.
I saw that team when I went to King George's.
Yeah,
So great. Yeah.
Can I just add through? So there's also
If you have 2 minutes.
Okay, sorry. I can have a chat later.
Okay, good. All right, let's move on. Audit and Risk Assurance Committee report, Sue.
Thank you. Apologies for a verbal report. We met yesterday. We have some new meeting clashes that we will get resolved in the next few months. But for now, you will get this in writing. The committee was not quorate for the reason of the clashes, so we have a couple of decisions that we'll do by email. We received our usual reports on counter fraud, internal and external audits, and a few other reports as well. With regard to internal audits, we received 2 formal reports, one on the management of our PFI contracts and one on our business case and benefits realisation process. In both cases, we were given partial assurance, but with improvements. The good news is we didn't really hear anything that we hadn't anticipated hearing, so it painted a picture that we recognised, and we do know that we've got work to do in both those places, and work has already begun, including training for people on business case writing and a lot of governance reviews around PFI management. We also received one advisory report from internal audit that was a look at the process we'd implemented to investigate the waiting list, I always get the ERS, I always get the initials wrong, the ERS incident, and we were assured that largely the process we'd implemented was the right process to bring that to completion. The internal auditors did report that there were some actions in delay, so we intend to invite the owners of those actions to our next committee to discuss what might be the blockers to those actions. On an assurance side, we also received a case study relating to the managed equipment service. A concern to the audit committee has been for the last few months arising from an external audit that we weren't effectively managing throughput on that MES contract. This case study demonstrated how actually that situation's been improved, blockages have been removed, and we are now taking things into the standard business case and approval process through the investment group. So that gave us some assurance, but we continue to monitor the governance of PFI through the audit committee. Other things that we talked about with our external auditors, their focus at this meeting was on the charity, and it was largely a planning conversation. But during that conversation, we did identify some opportunities to further strengthen governance of the charity and to support its growth into the future. And Nick kindly agreed to write a paper for board consideration, as we are the corporate trustee, that will come to board in due course. So in the short term, obviously, we have two steps: complete the annual accounts of the charity and bring that to board in January, and then we'll look at the proposals and possibilities after that. We also received the annual report of the work of the committee. That will come here. We reviewed the BAF and the high risks, and in a delightful bit of synchronicity noted that there had been some reduction of high level risks, and in some instances risks raised and resolved in the space of a month, which was very positive to see. On the BAF, we noted the need for the board to consider risk appetite, and I know that is on Linda's forward plan. And we also noted the need for trajectories to demonstrate how long it's going to take to shift the dial on some of those BAF risks, because things like digital estates and finance, not least, are not going to happen overnight. And we need to understand how we're going to track to know that we are on track against those BAF risks. We received fire safety report, asked that it be reviewed, the plan against our future plans for agile working, because I think we are going to discover as we move to an agile world that people who are fire wardens quite often aren't in work, they're working from home, and we need to make sure we cover that risk off. And then lastly, we convened at the end of the meeting an auditor panel, and the auditor panel is the group. It's basically the audit committee with a fancy name. We convened the auditor panel because we intend to commence early our re-procurement of external audit, so that we are comfortable that we can get them in place quickly. And that's everything from me.
Thank you. Let's move on then to the BAF item. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. So the BAF report is an update on the report received at the board in September. It tracks our 11 risks against our 5 organisational objectives. Currently 8 are red, risk rated, and 3 are at an amber status. That position hasn't changed since September, and as Sue mentioned from discussion at Audit Committee, there's some requirement for us to be able to track and show graphically how that will develop over time, how we see those will reduce over the course of coming years. The main focus of the work recently has been to implement and to start discussing within our board committees the BAF risks. So recently we have discussed at the Quality Assurance Committee, we had a look at the 4 risks that the committee is responsible for monitoring. At the Finance Committee, we focused on estates and digital, and that linked into 2 reports that were received at that meeting. And at the People Committee on Monday, there was a focus on the key risk relating to workforce and equality. So that work is developing, and we will continue that work in the coming months. We have work to do on risk appetite, as we've mentioned, that we need to pick up as board. And the summary report that you've got in your packs includes a snapshot, a table for each risk, which sets out why we are in a position and any key changes that we've received in the recent month in terms of changes in controls or pieces of assurance, be they negative or positive, so that we can actually map each risk. Happy to take any questions on.
Thank you to the committees for the more in-depth work that, as you've identified, Linda, is being carried out in relation to sort of allocated risks in each of those committees. Any questions or comments? No, good, thank you. Fit and proper persons requirements, you'll see in the report that we have statutory requirements with respect to ensuring that members of the board are fit and proper persons. That's requirements on appointment and annual checks, and the report, as makes clear, should provide you as a board with assurance that those annual checks have been carried out satisfactorily. and yeah, and that's therefore we have fulfilled the requirements both in the statute and in policy that we have for fit and proper persons. Good. Use of the trust seal. Just need to ratify this if nobody has any questions on it. Okay, good. I am going to suggest that we do meeting effectiveness and risks identified during the meeting as part of our reflection in the part 2 board. Catherine, you have one item of any other business, and then we'll take questions from the public.
It's just an offer, actually. If anybody wants flu vaccine, I shall be doing an interval between. So do come to my office and I will give you a flu vaccine.
Free.
Yes.
You'll have one. We'll have 10.
Peter?
Given you were so on message on Workplace earlier, can I give you a 15-second update?
You can.
So thank you to everyone, members of the board who've activated their accounts. If you have, could you update profile pictures? If you are full-time employed, could you go onto your profile and update the organisational structure so people know where you fit within the organisation? 4,467 people claim their accounts, which in 1 month is more than 50% of our substantive staff. More than 300 groups. Anne will be having a group set up for the King's Fund Leadership. Catherine has one for the CQC inspection. They're a brilliant way for people to meet with their peers and find new people. The most active groups are EDI, maternity, and show us your pets. And in order not to damage Matthew's ego, I won't tell you who had the top place. Yeah, nice.
Okay. Are there any questions from members of the public?
No, not you. My name is Intisar Gilani, and the reason I'm here today is to try to convey to you how bad an experience my daughter had when she attended the A&E at King George Hospital. Now, I was trying to follow what one of the members earlier was talking about in terms of performance, but I don't know what PELC is, and I presume that's a separate company, is it? Or
Mr. Galani,
yes.
Shall we? I think the best thing might be you've obviously submitted a lot of details about your experience with your daughter, and I'm very sorry about the experience that you had at King George's that you both had there. And I think, as we've said to you, what we will do is we will do that properly as an investigation and a complaint and respond to you about that. You have linked to your question a sort of, and because we don't deal with individual cases at the board, but what you could do is you could ask the question that you have linked to the individual experience that you've had, and we can respond to that now.
Okay. Well, the question, it needs to be informed by some of the stuff I went through in the statement. So I mean, having sat here for a number of hours to wait to do this, I would like to tell you what happened to her, but I'll be brief. What happened was that she became ill over the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd of October, and 111 advised her to go to A&E to make sure that there wasn't something more serious going on. To avoid, taking up valuable ambulance resources, we decided to make our own way down to King George, and she was feeling very ill. And as we entered the hospital, it wasn't clear where we were supposed to go. And it would have been nice if there was a wheelchair that we could have pushed her along in, because she was having trouble walking. Anyway, so we went into a room, and the person there was obviously part of the setup, but he wasn't very helpful at all, very offhand and officious. But eventually we got into the system, and it was a large room called Major's B or something. And the worst thing about it was, I mean, wait times we can understand, staff are under pressure and so on. But I remember A&E in the past, there would be cubicles where people would have beds to lie on. And she was, you know, not in the best state, and she was made to sit on an upright chair for many hours. One of her paracetamol doses, in fact, was also missed. And one of the worst things about being in that room was that she said there was no privacy and no confidentiality. She could hear the problems that all the other patients in the room were suffering from. So that all those people had no privacy. So, you know, after many hours of being there, we were in there a total of about 13 hours. She was treated and sent home for a follow-up at ambulatory care. So I think really I'm coming to the question. The question is, when can we expect a reasonable standard of care in A&E where people don't have to just sit in chairs and put up with loads of other patients being very close to them, and there's no privacy? So really, that's my question.
Thank you for your question, and once again, I'm very sorry about the experience that you and your daughter went through, and I'm sorry that you've had to come and sit and wait, which was why we said that we would deal with it as a complaint. But given that you have, perhaps we could respond to the broader question about the quality of care in A&E, and I don't know, Matthew, whether or not that's you or Catherine or.
I mean, I can start. I feel like in the first place, I'm sorry about the experience that your daughter had, and I think it's one that's unfortunately too common for people at the minute who are trying to access urgent care and treatment. And I think the case you've raised raises a couple of questions. One is about one-on-one decision making, about why people are sent in to A&E and referred on. And I think sometimes with the remote consultation, it's quite difficult for systems to decide whether or not.
In this case, I think it was appropriate.
It sounds as though it was. But so that there's an issue about referrals in, particularly for people who are then able to be treated in the community and in other ways, and whether there's more we can do around that. Also, within King George, because it is very busy and tends to largely run close to capacity, what we tend to find is the cubicles are usually with patients who are waiting for beds and waiting for admission into the hospital, or as we mentioned earlier, mental health patients. Where sometimes we have a number of cubicles at King George's for mental health patients, and that puts pressure on the waiting room. And that does mean that people are often having to be seen and treated in that way. And what we try to do is get around to see people where they are, rather than always waiting for a cubicle to come available. So we try and avoid that situation. You might see them use people stuck in the back of an ambulance. We always get folk off the ambulances, we get them in, but we do treat people in order of sickness, and sometimes that does mean that some patients face a very long wait. So we have managed at Queen's to make a couple of changes that have seen our performance improve, and that we're hoping will start to bring wait times down. King George has been the focus for a lot of work there over the course of the next year. But I think at the minute we all recognise that the patient experience isn't where it should be, and we'll of course reply to you fully about your daughter's case. I'm sorry that was your experience. I'm sorry that was her experience. Thank you.
Andy?
Yes, Joe, I'm looking at people can't see me. Do you mind if I stand up so if they want to see me, they can see me?
Sorry, who?
Your chair members, we're on. Oh no,
I think they can hear you, Andy. Fire away.
Right, okay. But first off, an apology to the board. I got the wrong end of the stick following a freedom of information request and making all sorts of accusations concerning poor care. Principally, I confused. I finally got hold of some minutes which were redacted, and I was putting it all over the place on Twitter and Facebook that you didn't have resus at King George for children for years, but I misunderstood the minute, and it was related to a few months during the COVID period. So apologies for that, and I will always do the best I can and don't want to spread any disinformation ever, because obviously it damages my cause. Secondly, I just briefly want to welcome that you're allowing Facebook interviews at this board. That's a big step forward for transparency. That's great. Secondly, my request is that you consider changing your procedure so that disabled people who come here don't have to sit for hours on end, and you allow at their discretion public questions to be taken at the beginning of board meetings, And lastly, earlier in the year, you had budget allocation for clinical staff, but you couldn't find the staff, which impacted upon patient care, particularly stroke patients. So my request is, I'm hoping there's good news and you're spending all the money that you've been given by the NHS and you can now find the staff.
Matthew, respond to, we'll take away the idea about when we take questions, although the point of the board is for the board to meet. There are obviously lots of ways, quite importantly, that the public can engage with us, can ask questions. Whilst it's possible to ask questions in a public forum, I'm never sure that that's the best way of getting the sort of engagement that people might want to get. But we'll consider that. But Matthew, do you want to respond on that?
Yeah, there's been some good news on staffing, and I'll look to colleagues to correct me if I get my numbers wrong, but I think over the course of September and October, we've added more than 500 permanent members of staff within the trust, which is reducing our dependency on bank and agency shifts, and that's helping us reduce our costs as well as offer more continuity here. We've now got the highest ever number of permanent staff employed by PHRUT, both as an absolute number and also as a percentage. That said, we will still face pressures this winter, and right across North East London, there's pressures in certain areas. We've talked quite a bit today about HELP, who are on urgent treatment, and there's problems for them getting streaming doctors and nurses to work in there. There's also, for us, for certain shifts in the emergency department and critical care in particular, we're trying to get nursing cover sometimes is really quite pressured. And likewise for some of our inpatient services as well, trying to find the right consultant cover for anaesthetists and surgery similarly. So there's still undoubtedly pressure areas. But I think our overall staffing is looking healthier for this winter. Where we are hoping to open extra capacity, Caroline mentioned Clover Ward at King George, for example. We think we've probably got the workforce now that we can make work for some of that. So it's a better position than we were in certainly 12 months ago.
Gosh.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for part one board. We will start part two board at 15:40 in 15 minutes. Okay. Thank you.
How many jobs can you put
Yeah.
So